Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Committee of the Whole. We start these meetings, as all meetings, just acknowledging that we're holding them on the traditional territories of the Coast and Strait Salish peoples, specifically the Lekwungen-speaking people known today as the Esquimalt and Songhees First Nations. I'd also like to just point out that this event is being live streamed, so if you come forward to speak on any item, you'll be recorded, and that recording will be available in future. For those of you who aren't familiar with our different kinds of meetings, today is a committee of the whole. So today we're sitting less formally than we do as a council, and we're here to have consideration of the items in front of us. And depending on where this committee goes, we will recommend to council for future meetings for making the actual decisions on things. But it is a more informal format, so we're going to get through the items as we need to. We're going to try and get out of here in around 2 hours. That might be a little tough today, but just it's such a nice night. We'd all like to get outside and enjoy that. So, first item on the agenda, we have Parks, Recreation, and Culture minutes. There's very detailed reports here on all the pieces. Is there anything you want? We have Monty Holding here and Ray Herman, who's the director of Parks, Recreation, and Culture. Is there anything you want to highlight in the minutes or anything on here? We have a couple of items that have been pulled out for later discussion.
Thank you, Your Worship. I think the minutes are quite straightforward, but just for folks who may not have read them, the Commission did have a couple of delegations. The first was former Mayor Christopher Costin and Liz Bicknell were there to talk about the Vancouver Island Trail and a request to have Anderson Hill Park as the starting point of a trail that would run from there up to Cape Scott. And the vast majority, I think 600-ish of the 770-kilometer trail is already built, and there are other trails that are linked together. But so that was well received, and there'll be further work with the group and staff as far as getting signage in place and some profile on a kiosk that's going to be at Anderson Hill Park as well. And there was a second delegation. Rick Marshall and Jacques Serrois were in attendance to propose that a public memorial be created and installed as a tribute to J. Fenwick Lansdowne to celebrate his artwork and the nature that was the subject of his artwork. They're visioning a multifaceted or multi-sided kiosk that would be potentially located along the waterfront somewhere. And there, again, is more work to be done there and some meetings arranged with the Public Art Committee and staff to further that initiative. A playground subcommittee report. There is a playground subcommittee that was established to begin fundraising towards new playgrounds or renovated playgrounds, and there was a document that's in this agenda package that came forward from that subcommittee. There was a document, as you may recall, I'm sure you're very well aware that the tree protection bylaw is due to be revised as part of the recommendations of the urban forest strategy. So there was a document that sort of summarized the major changes coming from the urban forest strategy that Mr. Hidley put together, and really that was coming forward for the Commission's input before work started on the actual wordsmithing of the new bylaw. And that was a good discussion. Mr. Hidley is here today should council have any questions on that document or the discussion and where we're going. Other than that, it was the regular monthly reports that the Commission usually sees.
Thank you, Mr. Herman. Are there questions from the committee? Councillor Ney.
Thank you very much for that, Mr. Herman. My eye caught the major changes to the tree protection bylaw, and it's looking really good, and I have no doubt that we're going to be able to meet these ambitious targets with these kinds of changes. I have one question on the building envelope footprint item of the report, where it speaks to what happens to a lot where there's a replacement of trees and the applicant can make a proposal for cash in lieu of planting the replacement trees. And so I have two questions. One is, how does that cash determine? How is that amount of money that the applicant would pay to the municipality determined? And second to that, will another tree then be placed on another place in the, I think that's what I'm reading here, but I just wanted to verify that another tree will be put into another part of the community if it can't be put on that building lot.
We have Mr. Hidley here as well, the manager of parks. Is this a question that I should hand over to you? Okay, no,
Yes, thank you, Mayor Murdoch. Through the mayor, thanks, Councillor Renee. Our standard price for a tree that is removed from a building envelope, at this time not the footprint, but the envelope, is $1,250. So if the tree is replanted on the actual property in itself, that money is held for a period of time until the tree is well established and then returned. If there's not room on the actual lot to replant the tree, the money is taken in lieu and is used to plant a tree somewhere else in the municipality.
Thank you. Are there other questions of staff? Seeing Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you to staff, also probably to Mr. Hidley. Just under item 4 for replacement trees, it indicates an amount not less than $300 for dead, diseased, dying trees. So I'm just wondering, is it sort of intended to be on a sliding scale based on sort of size or significance? Is not less than 300, but I could sort of agree that 300 is the minimum. How is that scaled up?
It's not scaled up, but that's the average price to plant or let's say purchase and have staff plant a tree. The aftercare of the tree would be either up to the resident if the tree is replaced on their property, which we hope it is, and if not, the $300 would go to the tree planting fund to either fund trees for private or municipal properties.
Councillor Zelka, and then Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you very much, Chair. And I just want to say, with respect to the proposal for the tree protection bylaw, very good work. It's looking like it's going in a wonderful direction. I heartily approve and look to support. I did want to ask that with respect to a tree that has to be removed from a property, and I see in Section 4 it says basically that the manager of parks services will essentially be the, I guess, the arbiter in some ways of a replacement tree or with respect to planting and cutting. I presume that will be applying across the entire bylaw with respect to making the decision as to whether a tree will be on property or has to be on another property. How will the decision essentially be made for those situations where a tree has to be replaced and some cases being made to saying, oh, we don't have room on this property?
Thank you, Councillor Zelka. I'll use the example of a Gary oak. So about 35% of the trees that we remove on private land are Gary oak because they're mature, over mature, dead, diseased, dying. Often there is not an opportunity to replant a tree like a Gary oak, which is a sun-loving tree, just because of the canopy is relatively closed in. So we'd look for another spot on that property for a Gary oak or an alternative tree, and if not, somewhere else on municipal property.
And follow up, and if there is a disagreement between the property owner and the manager of Parks and Rec, is there some sort of appeal process that's being anticipated, or are you your role as acting as the final arbiter in this case?
I would be the final arbiter.
Thank you.
We'll get you some fancy robes. Yes. Yeah. Councillor Braithwaite, then Councillor Green.
Thanks so much, and through you, Chair. I actually have two questions. The first, I'm thinking probably will go towards our building and planning staff. It's in regards to number 5, the building envelope footprint. And I'm just wondering, I think in the past we've often, when a plan comes to building and planning, and it is looking like we're going to have to remove quite a number of trees, oftentimes building and planning will work with the applicant in trying to move the building envelope this way or that way to try and save those trees. Is that correct?
Yes, Your Worship.
So,
Commissioner.
so I'm thinking that hopefully in the future it can be done even more so that we can perhaps save even more trees, because I think maybe if something comes to that might be something that has to come back to council, in that council might need a little bit more regulation around that. I'm not sure, but that would be something to me that would be really important, that we would have a little bit more control over where that building envelope would sit on a lot, so that we can make sure that we keep the most trees on a lot. So that's just one comment. And then my next question is to, I guess, Mr. Hidley, through you, Chair, if that's all right. And it's in regards to number 6, zoning. And I know that around the Parks, Rec and Culture table, we had a bit of a discussion in regards to the commercial and mixed use being at 30% and the multi-unit residential being at 20%. And I know there was a bit of a conversation around that, and that perhaps it might be good for the rest of council to hear that conversation. And so if you wouldn't mind just kind of talking about why there's that difference there.
Thank you, through the mayor. Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Mainly because I was a little bit unclear at the commission meeting. It's on a little bit of a sliding scale, but Mr. Herman answered the question today through email. Says, as you may recall, when discussing potential changes to be considered to the tree protection bylaw stemming from the urban forest strategy at the last commission meeting, there was a question as to why multi-unit residential zone properties would have a target of 20% canopy over when a commercial zone property had 30% canopy cover target, and should the multi-unit target be raised to same degree as commercial. Further review of the urban forest strategy shows that there are 2 commercial uses, including in one line on the table on page 26, 27, 30, 29 in particular. Commercial uses are generally thought of as zone C1, C3, or 5 and have a target of 10%. Commercial recreational uses, zone P3, e.g. golf courses, yacht clubs, have a canopy of 30%. Multi-unit residential use has a canopy of 20%, so it's a higher target than the typical commercial uses. Does that clarify that?
Yes, thank you. For me, it does. I'm not sure if it does for everybody else.
It's a little bit complicated, I know.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank
Hidley.
you.
No, Councillor Green.
Thank you, and through you to Mr. Hidley, thank you very much for such a comprehensive report that is definitely going in the right direction, and I'm very pleased to see it. Just a couple of questions. On the first page, under number 1, protect and enhance canopy cover to approach 40% by 2045. Is the 2045 a fixed date? I'm asking because in the context of urgent climate change now, a number of municipalities in the CRD have declared a climate emergency, and we know that worldwide things are not great. Is that year flexible? Could we move that up to address the urgency of climate change in our area? Thank you.
Thank you,
Mr.
Councillor
Hidley.
Green, through the mayor. You could with considerable resource. I think that when we budgeted for the urban forest strategy, we took that into account. We would consider 35 to 40% a success after the end of the 15-year term. So essentially, if we hold our own where we are, we're at about 33% canopy cover now. If we increase it a little bit more, maybe even best case scenario, getting it up to 40 would be great. But expediting it would require considerable more resource.
Okay, thank you. And one other question. On page, under number 6, zoning, we have established neighborhoods at 35% target and uplands at 45% target. Is there any reason why we couldn't bring the established neighborhoods target up to 45 that would be equal with the uplands target? What is the reason for the difference? Thank you.
Mr. Hidley.
Thank you, Councillor Green. The reason for the difference is that there's just space to grow trees in the uplands. When a lot of the smaller lots throughout Oak Bay, you just don't have the area that the uplands does. Uplands currently sits at 44%, which is great. So there's still some work to do there. The one area that we'd like to focus on is the area around Carnarvon Park, where we have some real challenges with a whole series of relatively short-lived trees coming to the end of their life expectancy. And the Carnarvon area is sitting around 18%. So there's one area where there's a huge opportunity to put a lot of energy into the urban forest in regards to planting trees both on our land and private land. But essentially, you have 45% in the uplands because of the lot size.
One comment, and thank you very much, and I appreciate that. That is the reason for the difference. As you know, in the established neighborhoods, in the last certainly 6 or 7 years, we have seen the denuding of the smaller lots quite heavily with housing demolitions and so on, and often the lots are completely devoid of natural habitat. So that's the reason I'm concerned that I would love to see it higher. But I realize, are these targets flexible over time, or are they fixed for the 15-year window?
They would be flexible, but with new buildings, we're building the planning right now, with the index in the back of the urban forest strategy, which essentially gives you square meterage per type of tree. We're using that to reach those targets with new landscapes. Now this is projecting things down the road because trees obviously have to grow, but essentially that's how it works.
Thank you very much.
Councillor Patterson.
Thank you, Mayor, and to Mr. Harley through you. On number 9 in this, the permit application process, there is the $50 application fee for the municipal arborist to inspect private property trees, and then in the second paragraph, it's $500 on the other aspects of the bylaw. Could you please just clarify it, because presently there are qualified arborists that do come out, attend properties, and provide inspection services and reports, depending on how much your service usually costs. They will sometimes provide those at either free of charge or at a greatly reduced charge. Would the $500 application fee be on top of that? Will it be additional to?
Mr. Hidley.
Through the mayor, thank you, Councillor Patterson. The $500 fee pertains to the municipal arborist reviewing actual new developments. So that would be site servicing, that would be the landscape plan, that would be the placement of the house on the lot. So anything that has to do with actual development, that's a cost to cover his time off. So he spends a considerable amount of time doing this as we're getting more involved with the urban forest strategy, but what really happens with our urban forest through the whole building process. So that's what that $500 offsets. The $50 is an application fee, and this wasn't a recommendation in the urban forest strategy. It was my recommendation, looking for funding models for the actual urban forest strategy in itself. And we do about 250 permits a year. That would be someone like yourself coming and asking about various trees on the property. It's a wonderful service that the municipal arborist or myself or the other two arborists give, where you're able to go onto a property and assess the actual tree that is stated on the permit and just give some really, really good advice. One of the issues that we've seen happen in Saanich is that they don't have any permit process for pruning of trees. And what they've found is that they get a great deal of complaint from the public when people are out pruning trees, even though the pruning in itself has to be done to International Society of Arboriculture standards. What happens is, because it's an unregulated business, anybody can hang their hat and call themselves an arborist. So they've found that by not controlling the permit process, they just end up responding to complaints from the public about somebody pruning someone else's tree. So the $50 is there to cover off the time that the municipal arborist goes to visit properties.
Councillor Zilke, you wanted to speak again?
Yes, please. I just want more clarification, if I may, with respect to again the tree protection bylaw. With the definition of a of a tree or a protected a tree to be protected being dropped from 60 centimeters down to 30 centimeters, I imagine there'll be more trees now on properties that will be fenced off and protected during the whole construction process. And that will mean many more trees, most likely in the setbacks and the front yard and backyard, of course. In the past, what I've noticed is that, and this question actually may be for buildings and planning, in the past what I've noticed is that the construction techniques in Oak Bay, maybe the more modern construction techniques, is where they do lot line to lot line excavations. Sometimes resulting in fences and part of gardens in nearby properties falling into the hole. I would love to understand how buildings and planning will be working with the parks to work around, I guess, and maybe educate our development community around some of these new requirements and what may and may no longer be allowed within Oak Bay.
I think it is an appropriate question for Mr. Anderson.
Well, I guess I should say in general that certainly with a new bylaw in place, we'd be working with parks and the building industry to understand that and make sure that everybody does understand that and implement the intent of the new bylaw. I think that's basically what I'd like to comment on at this point in time. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to make a motion that the minutes of the meeting of the Oak Bay Parks Recreation and Culture Commission held June 5th, 2019, and the recommendations contained therein be approved.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Okay, before I call a question, I have a couple of questions myself. I'm going to invite the public if anybody wants to come forward. It was fine to have a motion on the table. It's good. I'll two quick questions on the tree bylaw since it's the theme of the day apparently today. One, just an observation, just in considering things. The table under section 6 zoning, it lists it by zone type, but there are many different non-complying lots within those zones. So in fact, we're looking at one today that's a part of an HRA that would, it's already, RS2, which this is compliant with, which is supposed to be minimum 23,000 square feet. It's about a 10,000 square foot lot. If modified, would be about an 8,000 square foot lot. So some of these percentages may have some issues on some of these lots, just as a consideration. So there may have to be some caveats put into those, just the zoning. Actually, in fact, we have quite a few under minimum size lots for even the small lots. And the other piece was personal pieces. We have a difficulty getting people to plant our protected trees a lot of times. They're lovely, but they're messy, especially the Gary Oaks. And so I would love to see some mechanism in here to provide some incentives for people to plant some of those, because part of the Gary Oak ecosystem model where they thrive is in that sort of contiguous. And if we're carving out large chunks of private land and not seeing those planted, it would be nice to see some ways, some more carrot aspects of this to kind of allow people to encourage them to plant on their own free will. Maybe give them some windows of holiday where if they plant it and want to take it out, they can do that. But so it's not quite so written in stone on some of these aspects. So it's just things I think would be of some value. And I had one question really for Mr. Who this is for? Mr. Herman, I think would be the right question here. The draft playground guidelines that were in the minutes, have those gone to staff at all yet, or is that at this point just a committee of the commission that has been doing that work?
They've not been run by staff for comment
Not
at
yet.
this
Okay.
point.
Okay. Thank you. We have a motion on the table. Is there anybody from the audience who wishes to come forward and speak to any of the items on the minutes? I'm just going to point out, because it's not always clear, we have two things that are pulled out of this. One is the South Willows beach dog restrictions, which we're going to talk about next, and then the Carnarvon Park tennis and pickleball aspects, which we'll again talk about separately, and you'll be invited forward. So those two items, notwithstanding, anybody else wish to come forward and address council or have questions? Yes, please come forward. You have to, I'm sorry, you have to come forward, state your name, and you can speak in this microphone, yes.
Okay, my name is Bob Louie. Very interested in your conversations about trees in Oak Bay. I am a forester, since retired, of course. One of your comments about what to do with the public and encouraging them to carry out, give them a free tree. You can grow them, and then that's it. So you can have, let's say, 20 of them available for purchase at $5, free, whatever. There you go.
sorry, could you just come back and just write your name down? We have to, for the minutes, want to have your correct spelling of your name. You don't want to have 50 years from now people trying to find you and not be able to find the right spelling. Is there anybody else who wishes to come forward to speak to council? Or committee, sorry. Not seeing anybody. We have a motion on the table. Bring it back here. Any other comments? Councillor Zelka?
I just want to give my thanks relating to reports item 8 on the minutes. The Public Arts Advisory Committee meeting minutes will be posted on the website for the public starting this summer. I'm very happy to hear that. Thank you.
Very good. Seeing no other comments, all those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed? Thank you very much. Motions are approved. We're done with that. Thank you, Mr. Holding, for coming out tonight. I guess you're sticking around for the other 2 items as well, are you? Item number 2 on the agenda, South Willows Beach dog restrictions. We have a report here from staff. Mr. Herman, I'm assuming I'll give it to you or to do an overview.
Sure, thank you, Your Worship. As the council is aware, on March 6th, the commission did have a visit from Friends of the Victoria Harbour Migratory Bird Sanctuary with a request to consider restricting dog access year-round on the south end of Willows Beach, essentially from the end of Bowker Avenue to the Bowker Creek estuary. That documentation came forward at the Committee of the Whole on March the 18th. So that documentation was seen by council as well, and there was a request to bring forward a report. There are actually, before I speak to the options, I should note that as defined in the animal control bylaw, that area that we're talking about is not part of Willows Beach. So the first option in particular, I'll speak to it when we get to it, but it probably wasn't as clear as it should have been with pointing that out. That being said, obviously staff are aware that this issue has got some very strong feelings on both sides of the issue. So staff were trying to look at this in a way that before we amend the bylaw, we have a clear sense of what might work or might not work, and so that we're not amending the bylaw and coming back to you 6 months down the road or 8 months down the road asking to amend the bylaw once again. So the 4 options, it says here one is maintain the status quo, but right now on the area that we're talking about, the south of actually the beach, dogs are allowed there off leash according to our bylaw year round. However, under the migratory bird sanctuary regulations, the federal regulations, they state that cats and dogs are not to be at large, and I've contacted them for a definition of at large, and essentially they're talking about off leash or on leash. So really we're in a little bit of a funny area there where our bylaw is not consistent with those federal regulations, but the one option, maintain the status quo or allow the same regulations that are happening at the main part of the beach as defined in the bylaw. So really that should have been split into 2 different options. The second option here would be to request or to approve the request as was outlined. This would provide the best level of protection for nesting birds in that area. The third option here is to amend the animal control bylaw to allow dogs to be on leash at Willows Beach from the end of Bowker to the south boundary. We tried to define where we think the estuary ends. We kind of landed on the south end of GNS School where the stairs go down to the beach. And if you allowed dogs there to be on leash from October to April, that would be consistent with the federal regulations. Essentially what staff kind of landed on again, with the intent of trying to a trial to find out whether what we're proposing is going to work, is to implement option 3 on a time-limited trial basis, maybe essentially over the winter of 2019 and 2020. to allow dogs to be on leash in that area, consistent with the regulations, but for a defined period of time, after which we could come back with some recommendations. I didn't list, there could be some other option here as directed by council, but the one thing also is there's been no significant engagement process that has taken place, other than certainly we've heard from folks on both sides of the equation, but we certainly have not gone out and solicited feedback and tried to gauge where the community really wants to go here. If that's something that council wants to see, we believe that engagement process will need to be thorough, and the feedback will be extensive and need to be managed. And certainly another option would be to refer the issue to 2020 estimates discussions. And if that's the decision council wanted to make, staff will ensure that there's a good cost estimate put together in time for those discussions.
Thank you, Mr. Herman. I love things like this. I have no right answer. It's always fun to deal with. Councillor Green.
Through you to Mr. Herman. Thank you very much, Mr. Herman. This is really helpful. This is a very difficult issue. I was in another community at one time when we tackled this issue, and it was very challenging. And there is a lot of passion on both sides of the issue. If we ran this as a trial for the winter of 2019-2020, do you envision, or what is your vision for public engagement following the trial as an evaluation process?
Through the chair, I don't think I could say that we've really thoroughly thought that out. We've certainly talked about good signage to ensure there's education going into it. We haven't talked as much about the evaluation of it, but certainly I think we could put an online survey together and add that to the signage information to give people opportunity to let us know what they think.
Yes, my feeling is that the public engagement piece is missing, but I think the public would be satisfied that if there was a trial for this program, that if they had a voice at the end of the trial period to help with the evaluation, I believe the public would be cooperative with that approach. I could be wrong. There are people here tonight, and they may correct me on that point. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Just before we go any further, there's people waiting outside and at the back. There's a couple of seats at the front and a couple, I think, scattered empty seats. If anyone wants to come in and have a seat, perhaps people could squeeze into the empty spaces and give some space. And there's some space at the front as well. You can stand at the back door where it's cooler as well if you wish, or just making the offer there if anybody wants to sit down. Councillor Zolka, you had your hand up?
Thank you very much, Chair. I want to thank the Parks, Rec and Culture Commission for this attempt to deal with this very serious issue. And I appreciate the three options that are being provided, including the Canadian option, the middle way, which is probably the one that I'm going to be supporting. I appreciate you pointing out that we're in the midst of a migratory bird sanctuary. And I note in the Canadian Migratory Bird Sanctuary Regulations, on the Bird Convention Act, Section 5, subsection 2, a game officer may destroy any dog or cat found chasing or molesting migratory birds in a migratory bird sanctuary. So I very much appreciate you taking this seriously, since we don't want any of our dogs or cats destroyed. Thank you.
Any other questions of staff at this time? Councillor Braithwaite?
Thank you, through you, Chair. Mr. Herman, can you just give me the definition of not at large again?
Through the chair, on leash.
Has to be on leash. Okay, thank you. And then I think I heard you say that it's a federal regulation that they have to be on leash anywhere in the migratory bird sanctuary. And so if it's a federal regulation, are we not beholden to have to follow that?
I mean
Sorry, Mr. Herman.
Through the chair, I'm not sure what the ramifications are of knowingly not following it. I don't know that. I certainly have talked to a representative from that federal ministry who indicated that they would like us to try and follow the regulations, but that they didn't actively enforce or go looking for issues. They're
It's
more
just be a matter of
complaint driven.
aligning our bylaws with their regulations as opposed to, yeah, complying or not complying. Ms. Varela?
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. So in most cases, a local bylaw cannot be used to supersede provincial or federal legislation. So exactly, they might not seek it out, but again, this is something now that we're aware of it, we should align.
And a point of information, if I may, that may help. The regulations, subsection 5 subsection 1, puts the onus on the owner of the animal, not necessarily on any other level of government. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Not seeing any. I appreciate you you bringing this forward. I had I guess I really have more comments than questions at this point. I think there's, if we're going to do any kind of trial piece, we should set up some very simple thing on the signage that says, please provide feedback, and have an email address or something that people can just send their feedback of how things are working on that, just so we can have a sort of a running number of things without having to sort of ask people to stumble upon it. And also, I think, provide notification of this trial to all of the adjacent and near adjacent landowners just by email or just by mail, just to let them know that it's happening so that they're aware. And again, it can provide feedback. Without any other questions, I'll ask members of the audience who wish to come forward to address council, or committee, I should say. I keep getting that wrong. I should know that by now. Anybody here wishes to address the committee on this topic, Willows Beach? Again, our process is just, if you can just state your name for the record and then write it down, and the municipality of residence as well, if you would. Push the button for, there we go, you're live.
Good evening, thank you. My name is Rick Marshall, I'm a resident of Oak Bay. I have 3 points to raise, and thank you to Mr. Herman for clarifying. The first point, which was that the area that we're speaking about now is not part of Willows Beach, as that is defined in the Animal Control Act now. That act, bylaw. That bylaw defines Willows Beach as the area from Boker Avenue north to the Bluffs at Cattle Point. And the area we're speaking about is south of Boker Avenue and might more properly be referred to as the Boker Reef and Boker Estuary area, to distinguish it from what we know commonly as Willows Beach, which is a sandy, gently sloping beach and very popular for recreational purposes. The area to the south, the Boker Reef and Boker Estuary area, the shoreline is very rocky and uneven. It's strewn with driftwood and so on, and that persists all the way down to the area that Mr. Herman has mentioned, the south boundary of Glenlyon Norfolk School. As Mr. Herman has just noted, this area is not affected by the present summer exclusion of dogs from Willows Beach. So the dogs under the current bylaw are permitted without restriction at any time in the Boker Reef and Boker Estuary area at present. The Animal Control Bylaw does exclude dogs at all times from specific areas within the municipality, including the native plant garden across at Beach Drive and the cross street.
Yeah, Margate.
Margate, thank you. The rose garden at the corner of Windsor Park, the walkway around Turkey Head, the walkway only, not the parking lot. And of particular interest in this discussion, Kitty Islet, which is at the south end of Beach Drive. That last area is the best comparator for this discussion, I think. I expect that it's, although it's not explicit in the bylaw, that dogs have been excluded from that area for reasons similar to what is proposed, the concern that is raised in this situation. The shoreline there is similar. It's very rocky. It's also frequented by birds considerably. It's a very hot birding spot, and as compared with the nearby sandy beach at McNeil Bay, where dogs are permitted with restrictions. I suggest that the Boker Reef and Estuary area should be similarly controlled. That is, that dogs should be excluded from that area at all times. The Federal Migratory Bird sanctuary regulation, as has been mentioned, prohibits dogs at large anywhere, anytime on the shoreline, which constitutes the migratory bird sanctuary, which includes all the shoreline of Oak Bay. And the question has been raised, and I would repeat it, how can an Oak Bay bylaw do anything other in its restrictions than what the federal act requires? That is, could an Oak, and the question has already been answered, but I raise it because it's a significant point. Can an Oak Bay bylaw permit something which is expressly prohibited by federal law? And the suggestion is no, it cannot. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to come forward and talk to committee about this item?
Jacques Sirois, resident of Oak Bay.
Welcome, Mr. Sirois.
Thank you. Thank you for council, the committee of the whole, and all of you to taking this issue seriously. I am impressed. I just want to make a few comments. Again, we're talking here about the Boker Reef area and Boker Estuary, from the end of Boker Avenue to Glen Lyon School. An area that is attracting still to this day, despite massive declines in numbers over the last 5 decades, still significant and interesting number of birds. I will just mention a few of them in a minute. So yes, ideally we'd like restrictions, no dogs at all between the end of Boker Avenue to the Glen Lyon School backyard, essentially. We're not talking about nesting birds, incidentally. So we're talking about foraging birds, feeding birds, resting birds, and roosting birds. The Boker Reef is a fantastic bird roost. There is actually no nesting taking place in that area. Just a correction. And prepare Mr. Herman to help you with the details if needed. I just want to also mention, we're talking here at Boker Reef, one of the best birding sites in Greater Victoria and in Oak Bay in particular, a site where Fenwick Lansdowne used to go bird watching all the time himself, interestingly. I have the list here of birds, 156 species of birds. This is a live list that is updated hourly. I will leave a copy with you, Mr. Herman, for your... it's just interesting, just to give you some numbers. 40 harlequin ducks at the Boker Reef on April 17th, 2019. 200 double-crested cormorants on November 2018. 80 Bonaparte's gulls in November 2018. 1 brown pelican. You remember the brown pelican? Came back there many times. October 2018. I'll just give you a few more numbers. Short-billed dowitchers, a lot of shorebirds gather there, a flock of 15 there. It's kind of interesting on September 2017 with some long-billed dowitchers. Just a few more numbers. Glaucus winged gulls, 500. So the gulls come to drink there at Boker Creek. These are the glaucus winged gulls nesting on Grand Chain Island. They need fresh water, so they come to drink in the estuary every day. 14 marble murrelets, species at risk right off the estuary. 400 California gulls in August 2016, and on and on. I will leave the list with you. It's just an interesting site. And so we would like to see the area to go beyond the migratory bird sanctuary regulations and have no dogs there year-round, if at all possible, in light of the fact that all of our beaches are used as dog parks already. So it would be lovely to have at least one site where there is no dogs at all. In terms of enforcement, are we prepared to enforce this? This is a question I have to ask. It's difficult. I see what's happening on the Turkey Head walkway, where it is basically never enforced, and there is dozens of infractions daily. Is this indicative of what we will have happen there? I don't know. I'm told by the enforcement officers that they have limited time to spend in Oak Bay, limited budget. So are we prepared to increase the budget of enforcement to make this happen? I want you to be clear that if there is no enforcement, nothing will happen, in my view. So we want to be serious about it. I want to reiterate the fact that there is a lot of committed naturalists in Victoria. We have a lot of information to share with you. We are available to help you flesh this out in a reasonable manner. We want a reasonable adult conversation on these matters. Just want to give you some numbers before I leave. At Boker Reef, the south end of Willows Beach, in the past, on Christmas bird counts, we would have regularly 1,500 American widgeon, sometimes 3,000 widgeons. Last Christmas bird count, there were 30 widgeons. So we've got a dramatic change in numbers of birds. And now we are facing a situation in 2019 where there is literally, it's a dog tsunami. It's everywhere all the time. So if we are serious about this, I think this is a site where we could do something reasonable and inform. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Serwa. I will.
Oh yes, there was the list.
I can. You're right about the enforcement. It is limited in terms of piece. We do have the ability to help direct them, though. So if we're implementing a new policy, we have the ability to ask them to go in and say spend some more time in an area, and they would typically do that through education rather than just ticketing people.
As you know, it's based on complaints, and I think we don't want to be complaining all the time. So I hope this will not be based only on complaints. But
as I said, we have the ability to help direct that. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Is there anybody else who wishes to come forward to talk to us on this item? And I'm not seeing anyone else. Okay. Oh, one more. I'm just going to ask people can try to keep their comments to about 2 minutes or so, just because we have a lot of items to get through tonight, and we're still on item number 2 right now, so we're trying to get to them. But don't let that hinder you, but just if you can keep them reasonably concise, it's appreciated. So if you just push the button, and thank you. Thank you.
My name is Bob Harwood. I live in Oak Bay. And I just want to reiterate what has been said before, is that the Environmental Protection Agency is indeed a federal agency, and it does strike not regulations, but it strikes laws related to protecting wildlife throughout the country and, as a result, throughout the world. And they have specified that no person shall be allowed to take a bird, destroy a nest, etc. No person shall permit a dog or cat to run at large in a migratory bird sanctuary. And that's pretty, one can apply, or a community can apply for a change to the regulation specific to themselves, but any change in the regulation would need to support the role of the Environmental Protection Agency. In other words, it would increase the likelihood of maintaining wildlife in the area. So again, yeah, I just want to reiterate, we do have a federal regulation, and it's actually a federal law. And I think it behooves us as a community to support that law, or to try and act to change the law, but not to act in discord with that regulation. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to come forward? Have a seat. Welcome. You just got to push the button and, again, state your name and municipality residence, please.
Pam Woodland, Oak Bay. Thank you very much for taking on this really tricky question. I really appreciate the Friends of the Greater Victoria Migratory Bird, etc., for bringing it up, and you taking it on. The only thing I have to say that's different from what's already been said, and I support what has been said, is that there's an awful lot of energy and concern about trees and preserving the canopy and the environmental issues around that and so on, which is hugely laudable. It's much more tricky to think about the birds and the whole shoreline, not just the birds, but that whole ecosystem, because there are other interests that don't really want to share it with the wildlife. If Oak Bay is really serious about having any kind of green agenda, it seems to me that it's a no-brainer that we need to work on re-educating people about what is valuable about this place and our responsibility to maintain that. What is being requested is like a baby step, just this tiny little piece. And I really hope that baby step is taken and that from that people can go further and recognize the value of other creatures that we share this place with. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Woodland. The door almost slammed shut there. Is there anybody else who wishes to come forward and address the committee at this time? I'm not seeing any, so we'll come back to this table. Are there any additional comments or questions of the committee? Councillor Green?
I was alarmed at one point because I thought Mr. Servat said there were roasting birds at Bowker Reef, but I see you said roosting, so I'm not so alarmed now. I guess I'm torn now on this option because, in fact, we are not complying with federal legislation. That's a concern of mine. And so really, I'm torn between option 2 and option 4. And I do still have the concern about the public input piece. It's too bad there aren't some dog owners here to speak to this. It would be interesting to have their take on this. I don't know if anyone knows, but this is just a general question through you, Mayor, to staff. Do we know the level of dog activity at the Bowker Reef south to Glen Lyon? Do we have any idea of how often dogs are running loose in that area? Thank you.
Mr. Herman?
Through the chair, only anecdotally from some folks who live in that area have indicated that daily.
Thank you.
Councillor Zelka, then Councillor Patterson.
Thank you very much, Chair. My first question, I think, will be through you to our CAO, or whoever she designates, with respect to the jurisdictional aspect of Oak Bay. If I understand correctly, and as highlighted in, for example, the derelict boats issue, that Oak Bay's responsibility, if I remember correctly, goes to the high water mark. And then from high water down, it's another level of government, or another government that isn't necessarily Oak Bay. So that was the first question I wanted to ask. And the reason I asked that, the context is that when I look into the regulations, part 9 of the regulations defining what is this Victoria Harbour Bird Sanctuary, it includes only those areas that are below the high water mark throughout this area. It doesn't include any of the areas that are above high water mark. So hopefully I'll get clarification, or we'll all get clarification that our bylaws, if I remember correctly, only apply on our lands and don't necessarily apply on federal or provincial lands.
Ms. Vrilla, I don't know if you were able to answer that question or not.
Well, what I would like to request, Your Worship, is the piece of information about the federal legislation is new to me since I signed off on this report. If we could have the matter referred back to staff for clarification, because I certainly don't want to be giving anything off the cuff on such a sensitive topic. So my request would be to refer the matter back to staff, and we can bring you back some more robust answers.
Thank you. We can have that option, or we also, this is committee, we can move things forward subject to some of that information coming back as well. And I'm just going to share my corporate knowledge of this, because when we went through this question at the McNeil Bay, and that was the divide there was essentially that there would need to be some place for dogs to run free, so we allocated that for McNeil Bay, and then we allocated Kitty Islet, not so much for its unique natural pieces, but because there was picnic tables, and we wanted someplace that was completely free of dogs, so that they had space that people who didn't want to be around dogs in that area had a natural barrier to that beach, and put it there. But with this conversation came up at that point, and my understanding at that time was essentially we have an obligation for our regulations not to be against the federal regulations, obviously, but our bylaws are there to limit, so we don't have to write a bylaw that enforces federal regulations. So we can, and they can't be against that, but they can't they don't have, we have no obligation to enforce. That enforcement is done through federal agents, and I believe there's one on the West Coast, if I recall the conversation that time. So it's not highly enforced, unfortunately, because there's many areas that it should be. But I think that's an important part for us to come back to. I saw another hand over here. Oh, sorry, Councillor Patterson next.
Thank you, Mayor. Pardon me. And I'm not sure if Mr. Herman will be able to answer this or not, but the area of Willows that you are talking about is very rocky by nature, more difficult. It's not an easy walking surface. And so, practically speaking, at least from what I've witnessed, that is exactly the area that dogs are allowed always to be off leash, because it would be very impractical as an owner to try and have a dog on leash and follow it up and down the rocks. So my concern, and I certainly respect the fact that you are trying to find a balance here in managing this and allowing time for public engagement, but to request to have the dogs on leash to satisfy the federal regulation, I'm just wondering how practical it really can be.
Thank you. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. This is all very interesting. I think that for me, where it sits right now, and I appreciate, Ms. Varela, that you would like to have this come back to staff so you can look into it a little bit more. Where I'm sitting right now is I'm sitting at looking at option number 2, because I think that falls in line with the federal regulations, and that really meets, to my mind, what we are trying to do in that area. So I'm wondering if I want to put that motion on the table, if you would like us to try and move it forward while we still get information from Ms. Varela, or do we want to send it back to staff and start the process over again? So that's kind of where I'm sitting right now. But I'm happy to put a motion on the floor if that's what's required.
We need to move things along, so I think a motion on the floor to talk to is worth having at this point.
Okay, so I'll make the motion that we go with option number 2.
Second.
And option number 2 for those in the audience is to recommend to council to amend the animal control bylaw to restrict dogs in that area. Councillor Green and then Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, and thank you, Councillors Braithwaite and Appleton, for making the motion. I wonder if I was working on a small amendment to option 2 to that motion, and it was just to really include a public feedback mechanism at the end of a trial period, but it's still adopting option 2, but allowing for a public feedback mechanism at the end of that trial period. At the end of a trial period. So, in other words, we will amend the animal control bylaw to fully protect the area, but allow for some public feedback at the end of. So that was what I was thinking about. I won't make the amendment formally until I hear from my colleagues. Thank you.
Just as a point of order here, that amendment, just to be clear, that the motion is not to do a trial period. It is just to change the bylaw. So, yeah, I think if we're changing the bylaw, that consultation probably should, and will have public hearing and piece as part of that. So we'll have to have some public consultation. No matter what, we could extend that if we wish. Councillor Appleton.
Thank you, Worship. Just speaking to the motion, I support option 2 and the motion made by Councillor Braithwaite, primarily because it offers the greatest deal of protection to an area known to be sensitive, but also because I feel that approach is actually offers the most consistency for the public. It's clearly defined as an area that is not available to dogs year round. My concern about the leash option is in the wintertime period where dogs are allowed off leash on Willows Beach. And although we've discussed here and are clear on the fact that administratively this section is not actually part of Willows Beach, I think to most people who use the beach, they're not going to see a clear boundary between the area that we're discussing and Willows Beach itself. So then in the wintertime period, we're actually proposing to create sort of a dual standard where people understand that Willows is off leash and look forward to that time all year. But then we would put in place a leash restriction at a particular boundary area, which I think is probably going to be a bit confusing. And I think it's just more streamlined and more just more consistent in application to have that area be clearly identified as a no-dog area year-round. And then people can use Willows Beach, the Willows Beach that we all define as Willows Beach, as they have before, and it'll afford a more clear distinction between those two areas.
Thank you, Councillor Ney.
Yeah, so I won't repeat, but I agree. I thought you said that pretty well, Councillor Appleton. The consistency, the protecting, and the boundary blurring. Dogs don't know where that boundary begins and ends. So it does seem difficult to enforce. It's not the enforcement, it's the ability of the dogs to know where the boundary is that becomes untenable. But the one thing that I would like to see, and it's not necessarily a part of the motion, that we use this as an opportunity to educate the public about what is going on down there. So I hope that we'd also be able to include some signage at some point that could explain what's going on down there and help our public to connect and respect and appreciate the wildlife in that part of the beach.
Thank you. Councillor Zelka.
Thanks so much, Chair. While I would have preferred option 3, I can certainly live with option number 2. I actually don't see it, but I do look forward to maybe some additional information from staff. I don't see at this moment a legal concern with the jurisdiction of Oak Bay versus their jurisdiction of the federal government, where they basically meet at the high water mark. So essentially what we're doing here will be on essentially on the high watermark side, I believe, and hopefully we'll get clarification on that. I am similar concerned to Councillor Green that there appears to be no engagement on this piece. There's no, what I liked about the trial basis was that it essentially acted as a trial, as an engagement aspect. So at the very least, I'm hoping there can be an education period, a phase-in period, some sort of education, some sort of advertising period. Maybe that can align with the dates that are restricted on Willows Beach, so that the public is not confused with this thing being foisted on them without any notice. That would only potentially create concern in the minds of the public. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have a motion on the table. I'm just going to speak to it. I think there's some, I have some concerns about just making the recommendation and moving forward with it. I think that the perception will be it's just done. And I think maybe perhaps a process piece, if this goes forward, and I think it will, is maybe perhaps this may be done even if we go to first and second reading and put it on hold so we don't do all the work and just hold it as a trial to get feedback on that before we actually go through to do a season as suggested through the 2019-2020 period and use that opportunity for feedback to make any tweaks that we might see fit. But that would allow for signage and enforcement pieces as part of that. I'm sure we can find a process for that. At this point, it's sitting at committee, not council. So the recommendation from here would, if this passes, would be for staff to go away and draft up those changes to the bylaw. And I'm hoping bring back some suggestions in terms of implementation process. Is there any other feedback in terms of consultation that people would like to see before this goes forward to that? Councillor Green?
Just really quickly, I think Mr. Sirwa's numbers and data are useful. I would like to see something develop as a communications piece for the public, because I agree with Councillor Zelka, it is an educational process and it would be helpful to have the information. I don't think the average dog owner perhaps is aware of how sensitive that area is. So I think out of respect, for for public education. I think that we should have an educational piece. And I think Mr. Sirois certainly offered to assist staff with any educational information. So if that's something staff are open to, then I would encourage that. Thank you.
Thank you. I guess one final question here. This is additional work on staff, particularly at the Parks and Rec. So if the intention here is to have this in place, it's, either as a trial or properly by this winter, is that possible to go through the processes of drafting the bylaw, coming back here, going through first, second, third, public hearing, et cetera, to get to this in time for that season? Or is this something that we might consider having something moved up to make sure we have it for this winter if we're going to try to do this either as a trial or permanent?
From our department's perspective, October 1st is that key date. I think we could work towards that date, but I wouldn't want to speak for corporate services.
Well, this is a recommendation back at this point. I think if we can't be, we just need to know that, just so that we may have to change some of the process attached. I think the expectation here is if this goes forward, it's done this year, not the following winter. Ms. Varela, is that?
It's likely possible. That could be part of that loop back from staff, Your Worship.
That'd be appreciated. Thank you. All right. Any other discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed? All right. Thank you very much. Item number 3. Carnarvon Park tennis and pickleball facilities. I just want to point out that there is some new correspondence for this item. So if you have an older version of the agenda, just make sure you see there's a couple of letters that have come in. Mr. Herman, we've talked about this a lot at the Carnarvon Park planning process, but perhaps you can just give us a quick update of why this is in front of us at this time.
Sure, Your Worship. Through the Carnarvon Park planning process, obviously the issue of tennis versus pickleball courts and how many should be located at Carnarvon Park and a number of the details associated with that discussion was a hot topic and widely talked about. On a special committee of the whole meeting of April 29th, our consultant Lees and Associates did present their draft plan, which showed one tennis court and 4 pickleball courts, which essentially are on the same footprint as one tennis court. So 2 courts, which was, there was no tennis court showing on an earlier version. So that was an effort to address the feedback that had been received. At the end of the meeting, council asked that staff look at opportunities to relocate those pickleball courts to another existing court site, I'll call it, in the municipality. And essentially that means Henderson, where we have 6 outdoor tennis courts, or Windsor Park, where we have 3 outdoor tennis courts. We have no other municipally owned outdoor tennis courts in the municipality. Staff did look at those 2 options. Henderson, there are pros and cons to both. Henderson, those are our best outdoor tennis courts. They're in 2 sets of 3. They set up very well for tournament play, for things like that, and certainly our tennis staff were involved in the discussion. They had some concerns about the financial impact of losing some tournaments and things like that if one of those courts was converted to pickleball. Obviously, the positive of going there, it would have the least impact from a noise perspective on neighbors, just where the courts are situated. But given that those are really our premier outdoor tennis courts and the concerns about the impact on high-level play and tournament play, we did not recommend Henderson Park as a viable location to relocate the pickleball courts. And I should say, I think, for those who may not be aware, the idea was that it would be a swap. So by relocating the pickleball courts from Carnarvon Park to elsewhere would mean establishing 2 tennis courts at Carnarvon Park. So then we looked at Windsor Park. It's felt from a staff perspective that the noise issue is better, but not completely resolved there. The courts at Carnarvon are currently right up against the backyard of the neighbors. Once the plan is implemented, if they were to stay there, there would be some distance, but I think it's still up in the air whether there's enough distance to completely mitigate the sound to the neighbors in their backyards. So looking at Windsor Park, there's a further distance. Staff did go and measure. There's a road in between, and the courts would be facing the front yards of homes along Windsor, which led us to the recommendation. However, it should be noted, and certainly I think the correspondence come in would speak to the fact that we've just gone through a consultation process, but it was a recommendation of the OCP that Carnarvon Park plan be undertaken, and for good reason, because infrastructure was failing there. There's a negative side to that, or there's a risk, I guess, and we're realizing the risk now, which is we've talked to the neighbors around Carnarvon Park. We've talked to all the stakeholders in that park quite extensively and given them the opportunity to have their voices heard. Not all of them agree with all the recommendations, but we certainly went through, I think, a thorough process. That has not been done at Windsor Park. And so we're in a position now where, staff are trying to give you a recommendation here, knowing that we haven't done that, and not sure where to go with that, but anyone who would suggest they haven't had the opportunity to comment, that's an absolutely fair comment made. So the options here, I think, are very straightforward. One is to approve the Carnarvon Park Master Plan as originally presented, with the 1 tennis court and 4 pickleball courts. Option 2 is to swap out, for lack of a better phrase, and paraphrase the recommendation, to Henderson Park, which is not something that staff would recommend. The third is to swap out the pickleball courts to the Windsor Park location, or another option. I should also note, I think, that in the implementation plan portion of the Carnarvon Park Master Plan, the establishment of the new courts at Carnarvon Park is noted for 2024. A full departmental Parks, Recreation and Culture Master Plan currently is being proposed by staff, pending availability of funding, to be done in 2021. So it's certainly something that could be addressed. That, however, does not satisfy the immediate concerns, certainly of if we were to leave those pickleball courts at Carnarvon Park, the neighbors there. So I guess again, and my apologies, but perhaps the swap out could also be considered a temporary trial at Windsor. I know that the folks there won't. We've heard from some folks who don't like that option, but I do believe that the impact to those neighbors would be less than the current impact if we just leave them where they are at Carnarvon. But those are just my thoughts without us having gone through any kind of consultation with the neighbors in the Windsor Park area.
Thank you. I'm just going to ask one question to start off with, just because it kind of came up before the meeting started. We're looking at sort of $10,000 to $15,000 for painting, and somewhere in that range. Can you give us some idea what it costs to build a new tennis court or pickleball court from scratch?
I can give you sort of order of magnitude. It's going to depend on the ground conditions, because you have to dig down and establish a base or whatever, but it would likely be in 6 figures.
Yeah, if it's low or high, 6 figures.
Well, that again, it's as soon as those geotechnical engineers get a hold of a site, they can play with your budget quite substantially. But I would think it would be north of $100,000.
just if it was 100,000 or 900,000. That's kind of the range of the six figures. Just trying to get a sense. Councillor Green.
Through you, Mayor, thank you very much, Mr. Herman. Again, another challenging issue for you and for us. Again, my concern is the lack of public engagement with the Windsor Park area. And you've acknowledged that, and I appreciate that very much. Is pickleball really popular? I mean, I've never played it, but I understand it's very noisy. It's a ping that can probably drive you crazy, but is there a big take-up for pickleball in Oak Bay? Question. Thank you.
Through the chair, not only in Oak Bay, it's apparently the fastest growing sport in North America. We are not the only municipality in this region or this province that is dealing with a rapidly growing sport where there's been no previous infrastructure provided for it. So, but it's definitely a popular sport, and we'll see how long it lasts, if that's a trend or if it just continues to build. But we're actually seeing where it's been around actually since the late 1960s, I believe, but it's only just ballooned in the last decade maybe. But we're actually starting to see more younger people starting to take up the sport, so which leads us to believe that we will be seeing pickleball played for a fair amount of time.
Yes, I was going to comment that it was probably an older demographic that was driving the growth, but if younger people are getting involved, then it will continue to grow, obviously. Okay, thank you very much.
Councillor Ney.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to Mr. Herman. Yeah, I agree with Councillor Green that we're kind of doing due to no fault of your own, it's just the process that's unfolded. It's kind of a piecemeal consultation, and I do think at first glance it would be troublesome to impose this in that Windsor area without having had adequate feedback and input from that community, and I do know there's quite a bit of concern from that neighborhood right now. The question I have has to do with, I just started looking on the internet and looking at some YouTubes and trying to understand what this noise issue was over the weekend. And there were some remedies that were being suggested, and I was just wondering if you could help us understand the degree to which this has already been explored or not. But one of the sound mitigation strategies was to create a barrier around the court that would absorb the sound. And then there were some other sort of marketing things around different kinds of rackets that seem to absorb the sound more. And then thirdly, there were some other options around different kinds of balls that have been used, obviously not for tournament play, but for recreation play. And I'm just wondering if you could help us understand the possibility of making sort of having use of the courts with that kind of equipment, and what the sound barriers would do in terms of mitigating the sound to the point that it's not problematic, or will it always be problematic?
Mr. Herman.
Thank you, through the chair. Our staff, particularly our tennis supervisor, I think who will soon be have his title changed to racket sport supervisor, and the manager of recreation and culture have been dealing with any noise mitigation quite substantially. They've had a number of meetings both with the pickleball players and the neighbors at Carnarvon Park. As far as a noise mitigation system, there was something looked at, and we were actually prepared to purchase. But in the end, the neighbors, it would mean sort of a screen that would go higher than what the fencing is there now, and the neighbors eventually decided they didn't want that in their backyard. It would take away virtually any and all view of the park from their decks and what have you. So we did not pursue that option. Certainly we've talked about the softer balls to try and mitigate noise that way. Of course, the folks that we're talking to are sort of the formal players, the ones who block book and are there regularly, but we don't have really much control unless we're going to ask for funding to establish a pickleball attendant on site for folks that would just come and play casually. So you could put up signage like has been done in other places and hope that folks follow it, but I'd have to go and chat with those staff in terms of where we're at on that issue, but I know that has been discussed at length. I'm not as sure about the rackets. I'd have to go and ask whether that's been brought up. I'm not aware of any discussion about softer rackets, but that may have been something, and it may not have been, I'm not sure.
Thank you. It'll cost a lot of hush money no matter what we do. Councillor Braithwaite.
Can't believe you had the balls to say that. Sorry. I am going to ask a question of Mr. Herman through you, please. And that is the Carnarvon Park Master Plan. When would we be starting to implement the changes that are suggested in that master plan? Do we have a date on that and the finances to be able to do that?
Through the chair, the first order of business that's noted in that implementation plan is to then enter into further consultation on the building and, you know, all the things that we heard about, whether it should be 1 story, 2 stories, what should be housed there. There was quite a lot of discussion about whether there should be daycare there or not. So all those things, and then as a follow-up to that, getting architects' drawings and basically being tender ready to go. And the reason that the building was chosen first is because, for instance, all of the servicing to the spray park goes through the building, things like that. So it was just felt that that would be the logical place to start. So we don't have funding in place for that. I think we could start some of that, but I would anticipate some sort of budget request coming through as part of 2020 estimates discussions.
So I think if I may continue, I think what I heard you say is that the timing for having the Carnarvon Park Master Plan completed was 2025.
Through the chair, I think I referred to the courts are meant to be replaced in 2024.
Okay.
I can't remember the date of full build out, and of course that's going to depend on availability of funding to keep going.
Okay, so courts 2024, but I also heard you say that in 2021 we hope to have the whole parks master plan for the whole municipality ready. Is that correct?
Through the chair, correct.
So in my head then, I'm thinking 2024, 2021. In 2021, we could come up with a whole different plan for courts, both tennis and pickleball and whatever other sport might be coming forward at that time. And so if we just kept the plan as is right now, would that not make the most sense? Because in 2021, then we can actually have a more fulsome look at the whole municipality.
Through the chair, I think that's the easiest and way to grapple with this. The only downside is whether the neighbors at Carnarvon Park have the patience to last another couple of summers.
Right. Okay, thank you. Let me ponder on that one.
Councillor Green, then Councillor Zelka.
Through you, Mayor, to Mr. Herman. Mr. Herman, so because I haven't played pickleball before, so it's played on the same court surface but with different lines, is that correct?
Correct, yes. There's, in a tennis court footprint, there's actually 4 courts, and it's almost like a combination of tennis and table tennis. So there's 4 people playing in a much tighter space, and it's quite a bit more of a quick game. The rallies are quicker. I don't know if I've
so existing courts then for tennis are not converted to multi-purpose to include pickleball. So the lines are 1 court's tennis only, 1 is pickleball pickleball only, correct? Is that correct?
Through the chair, that's where we've come to. We did originally try to make the courts
Multi-purpose.
multi-use, and that was not successful.
So the impact on Windsor Park would be they would lose one tennis court. They have two now, is that correct? Three, sorry.
Correct. There's 3 there now. They would lose one for the time being, and then when the courts are reestablished or rebuilt, well, actually, that's not true. There are 5 courts at Carnarvon, but they're not in great shape.
Right.
So we took a couple of them we've not done anything with and just said they're unsafe for play and we're not fixing them up. There's 1 or 2 that are still being played, tennis are still being played. And then there's the 1 court where the pickleball courts are now. So we've done a little bit of patching there. If we were to do the switch, we would switch that Carnarvon Park back to the lines for tennis, and it would still be available. So they wouldn't lose a court for play, but certainly it would be not as nice a court.
Thank you.
Councillor Zelka?
Thank you, Chair. I'm still leaning towards the pickleball courts being moved to Henderson, even though it's not recommended by staff. And what I'm intrigued by was a comment made by Councillor Ney with respect to sound attenuation. I do notice that the houses in question in the Henderson Park area are in a gated community, and conveniently, there's quite a rather substantial brick wall separating those houses from those tennis courts, which potentially could, of course they're also covered with foliage, potentially could act as a bit of the sound attenuation without having to build anything. So I'm wondering whether maybe a trial basis might be an appropriate something to consider to give the folks at Carnarvon a break while we try it out maybe at the Henderson Park area as one of the ideas to put forward.
Councillor Owen, trying to stick to questions at the point, then we'll go to the public as well for feedback. Councillor Braithwaite, do you have any other?
I was just going to comment, I couldn't ever support anything like that happening at Henderson because of the courts that are there are really used for a lot of tournament play, and to take 1 or 2 courts away from that would really ruin the type of tournaments that you could have there. So I don't think, to me, that's not supportable.
Is there anybody from any other questions of staff at this time? Seeing none, is there anybody from the audience that wishes to come forward and talk to us? Talk to committee? Yes, please do come forward. So same process as before. If you can state your name and municipality of residence, and try and keep comments to around 2 minutes if that's possible.
Oh, thank you. My name is Suzanne Gregory, and I live across the street from Windsor Park, across from the playground, which is next to the tennis courts. And I'm concerned about the addition of the pickleball courts to an already busy and well-used park. I spoke to a number of my neighbors who are also concerned. One of my neighbors, Rosemary Armour, sent an email to council regarding this issue. So I'd like to read her letter, as I think it summarizes very well the problems that would be added by adding pickleball.
Just for the record, we have received and have read that letter, just so you know. But you're welcome to highlight it.
I did reduce it a little bit, but I thought
go ahead.
maybe other people might want to know.
Sure.
Okay, I'm glad you have it. She also wrote another letter later today about the noise. She wasn't too concerned about the noise initially, but she had other concerns, so that's what this letter addresses. First, she'd like to state that she is committed to the principle of community parks, but she says Windsor Park is a relatively small and well-used park that already serves as a venue for many activities that include the use of fields, both at the north and south ends, and the field house. The primary regular activities already taking place in the park include, but are not limited to, rugby, soccer, cricket, tennis, American football, and the children's playground is also heavily used by community members, and there's a lot of visitors that, of course, attend all the sporting events that happen at Windsor Park. There's also a daycare that uses the field house. In addition to the above regular activities at Windsor Park, there are numerous irregular activities that utilize both the park and the roads. There's several road running races, such as the Oak Bay Half Marathon, mustering for the Oak Bay Tea Party Parade, approximately 3 to 4 road bike races per year. It should be noted that these 3 preceding activities involve road closures around the park that impact the surrounding residents. There's also summer day camps run by Oak Bay Rec. There's pickup baseball, soccer, and rugby, antique car shows, numerous miscellaneous ad hoc events that vary from year to year involving the field house, such as wedding receptions, end of school year parties, grad parties, birthday parties, etc. I think that Oak Bay should be proud that this comparatively small park is so well loved and so well used. However, it seems to me that relocating the pickleball courts to Windsor Park could be the tipping point for overuse. The many and varied current users of Windsor Park would certainly be negatively impacted by this proposed move. I just think of all that, because I look at the playground and I think of all the moms and dads that stop to use the playground with their kids for 15 minutes, for half an hour. And there's usually parking in front of my house and down the block. But I wonder if there were additional pickleball courts with a lot more use, that if that would be available to the people who use that playground so frequently. I understand that pickleball is becoming an exceedingly popular sport, and I certainly believe that Oak Bay should support those members of the community who play it. This being the case, I think that perhaps it would be more appropriate to plan in a more rational way for its increasing popularity. Providing dedicated pickleball facilities somewhere else more physically able to ramp up would make much more sense from a future planning point of view. The neighbors around Windsor Park already willingly accommodate and live with a significant noise level, parking shortage, and reduced access to their properties. Adding pickleball to this list would be an unfair expectation to place on neighbors that already welcome and accommodate so many diverse uses. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gregory. Anybody else wish to come forward and speak to us? Oh, we have a couple of people who want to come forward. You'll all be accommodated. Good evening.
Your Worship, Council. I'm here because I met Suzanne this afternoon at Windsor.
Sorry, could you just say your name and...
Oh, yes, Harvey
municipality
Tanner, Oak Bay resident.
Thank you.
Good evening, Your Worship, Council. I'm basically here because I met Suzanne. Thank you, Suzanne. This afternoon. I am a former tennis player who plays avidly at pickleball. Her comment about Windsor being very busy, Carnarvon, to my way of thinking, is like it's Sleepy Hollow compared to what happens at Windsor. And the addition of pickleball, I mean, quite frankly, I'll play anywhere. I really enjoy the game. It's a very social game. It's a little noisy, yes, I admit that. But Windsor's just not an appropriate place for it to be. I think it should, quite frankly, I think it should be north of the Henderson Rec Center on the UVic land, which I think, I don't know who owns that now. I think at one time Oak Bay owned it, and then I think in the 60s the Hudson's Bay Company sold it to the university. I went to university then. So I don't know if they have any say, but there's a huge tract of land immediately in front of the rec center, and it is not being used for anything. Now, as has been mentioned, pickleball requires, it's actually a badminton court, for sake of argument, a badminton court. So you can put 4 in one tennis court, so you don't need a lot of land to do it. You could put 8 on 2 tennis courts. So I'm sort of just up here because I play with 2 groups, 50, and I'm blindsided by this because none of us knew this was coming, and I'm probably the only one here that knows about this. And I just wanted to come up and say that the pickleball is growing. There's millions in the States who play it. The best player in the world, I think, is 19 years old, so it's not some guy who's my age running around beating the hell out of them, pardon my French. We volunteer at a couple of schools for lessons, and and Oakby High goes out for lessons, so it's there and it's growing. I made notes which I can't read, so I don't know if there's anything else other than to say that where it is, I think, is it's unfortunate if you live in around a church, a school, or a recreational area, there's going to be noise. I don't think you can avoid that. And it happens to be that pickleball is a bit noisy. Now in the States, a lot of groups, they limit the number of paddles. They've done scientific studies about which ones you can use that are quieter, because down there'll be 100 courts, 200 courts, 1,000 members. So they really need to address the noise much more than we do. I think that's basically all I have to say.
Thank you, Mr. Tanner. Thank you for coming forward.
Thank you.
Yeah. And again, we're sitting as committee here, so these things come to, you can sit down if you want. I'll just say my piece on this, that the reason that we're here as a committee is just to kind of get this feedback and consideration and next steps. So there will always be formal consultation process attached to these things. It's just, this is our chance to kind of, we sent staff away to say, is there any other place we might put this? So they've come back with the pros and cons for that. Does somebody else, I think, who wishes to come forward?
About this, Jean Beatty from Hope Bay. Right. But I'm an avid player at tennis at Windsor Court, and often all 3 courts are used. Mm-hmm. And I'm not sure if pickleball on one court and 2 tennis players on another court can even work. Like, wouldn't there be interference of balls crossing courts and so on? So I don't know. It's just our experience, and I've lived in that area for 25 years and play very often and often have to wait. It's very well used.
Thank you. I think the answer to the question is there's the cost here would include having to put a fence up between the 2. Yeah. So there's a physical separation if we were to add this to another to a tennis piece. So that it would be reduced. Yeah. So yeah. Thank you. Please come forward.
Name's Brian Barr. I live in Oak Bay. Excuse me if it sounds like random thoughts, but as I'm listening to the meeting and listening to neighbors, there are a few things that come to mind. First of all, I agree with the gentleman that just spoke. I was a former principal for many years and dealt with community issues as our neighbors. And the reality is there are lots of noise kids make. There are balls that go into people's yards. It happens. Your choice are eliminate the school and eliminate kids, or move away. And that's maybe there's better choices. So that's my first point. My second point is if noise is the biggest issue, to me then Henderson Park is the single best option if we don't plan on spending anywhere from $100,000 to $900,000 on new courts. I have personal experience from taking lessons at the Henderson Center for the last 7 weeks. And I can tell you anecdotally that the tennis courts are not used very often. I'm arriving at about 11:45. I'm leaving about 1:30, 1:45, and the tennis courts are not used. I have no idea what the tournament usage is, but to me, not unlike the Commonwealth Pool, we don't have a pool here in Oak Bay. We send our competitions to the Commonwealth Pool. If we're looking at tournaments, could that not be something regionally that we look at, as opposed to limiting our options in terms of the use of Henderson Park? My last thought is, and again, I'm not aware of the master plan and what's going to happen at Carnarvon, but I'm thinking out to myself, if there is a master plan and the tennis courts are in such dire shape that they're going to be redone, pickleball, tennis, possibly 2 tennis, can we not look at the placement of those tennis courts, that they're not backed onto the neighboring yards? I mean, it's a tremendous amount of property. And if we have that flexibility in the master plan, maybe that's something that should be considered as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Barr. Anybody else wish to come forward? All right, so we're back to this table now. We have options in front of us. Where's the will of this committee? I'd probably look to a motion if we can, or if someone wants to make a couple of comments first, that's fine too. Councillor Green.
Thank you. The only comment I was going to make as we were sort of thinking about options, and I know Mr. Tanner mentioned the UVic lands, I did think of another location, but again, there would be a cost associated. But the very far end of Turkey Head parking lot, well, I know, and I knew that you would probably laugh, but actually, that that parking lot is rarely full. It is land that we currently have in our sites, so possibly that's that could be an alternate location. I know it's a wild, out of the box suggestion, but if we're looking at options and a location that won't intrude and interfere with residential areas nearby, that is one option. Thank you.
I think we can consider sort of net new options as part of this master plan piece. Councillor, yeah, I had Braithwaite and then Zelka.
Thank you, and through you, Chair. I was just hoping that perhaps like a couple of things came up in the comments from the public, and I was hoping that we could perhaps get a couple of them addressed. And number one would have been what Mr. Barr was asking about flexibility of placement of the court positions at in the Carnarvon master plan. And I think that perhaps what people don't realize is that we're not moving the soccer field or the baseball field, so there's actually, or the lawn bowling, so there's actually only a very small section of land that we have to work with. So perhaps Mr. Herman, you could talk a little bit about if there's any flexibility of placement.
Through the chair, you know, I think that was obviously a goal of the plan and of the consultant's work right from the get-go. I think that was probably one of the very first issues that we made them aware of. The courts will be further away from the neighbors the way the plan is laid out. But as you say, and this probably the second thing we said to the consultant is there's way more demand for the space in this park than we're going to have space to accommodate. So, for instance, there's demand for the spray park to be larger. There's things like that, for the playground to be larger and better, for an all-wheels area that is in there as well. And as you note, there was a couple of options earlier in the process, in the consultation process. One showed the one field being reduced in size, and the other one which would have allowed more room to spread out. That was, you know, the feedback on that, particularly from sport user groups, was don't touch the field. So the plan is as it is, taking into consideration all the demands and trying to address what could be addressed. And some of the demands fell off, like an outdoor pool and things like that. But the courts are situated further away from the neighbors in the plan.
So getting onto that point, right now the courts are backed up to the neighbors' fences, correct? And in the new plan, they are, and I'm trying to remember the number of feet or meters that they're away from the neighbor's backyard approximately now.
Through the chair, I'm sorry, I can't remember the actual number, but there's that all wheels area is certainly in between, and there's a little bit of green buffer in between as well.
So I think that we've tried in that plan to have as much space as possible between where those courts are. And I think we put the tennis court closer to the houses than the pickleball court, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Chair. So as I say, I'm still leaning towards Henderson. I appreciate the passion among some of my colleagues to protect the 6 tennis courts at Henderson, and I certainly understand that needs to be protected with respect to needs. But I'm very intrigued with some of the suggestions for other places in the area where pickleball courts maybe could be placed. I do note when I do a search in Google Maps, from the tennis courts out to the road allowance is a triangle piece of property in there. Now, there's an unfortunately rather large tree in the middle of that property, but pickleball courts are rather small. Maybe they could be scattered in that area. The entrance to the Henderson area is rather ornate with lots of flowers, but it also takes up a lot of space. Maybe pickleball courts could be placed there. And the entrance to the Henderson par 3 golf course and Henderson area could be slightly re-engineered. I do notice also that the Harrow Road allowance, which is still owned by Oak Bay, District of Oak Bay, a small piece of property on the technically part of the UVic sort of area. When I go back to the reports, the 2018 year-end report from park staff indicates that the new tree nursery storage area was moved into the Harrow Roads area, making things much better for our tree protection bylaw efforts. And I certainly wouldn't want to disturb all of the good works that are being done up in the area that's now north of Cedar Hill. But I was intrigued to hear that the old nursery was in the middle of the par 3 golf course. Couldn't pickleball maybe placed in the middle of the par 3 golf course? I wonder, since it has fencing anyway, and par 3, we probably don't have too many drivers going on, that as a potential place for us to look at this fastest growing sport in North America and trying to make room for it in a place that will not disturb or will disturb the fewest number of our residents with the noise that it makes. Just a suggestion that I'd like to have staff maybe comment on.
Staff can comment. I think any conversation of any of that would be part of the Parks Master Plan, but Mr. Herman, is there any part of that you have a...
Correct, Your Worship. I mean, we could probably sit here and brainstorm 20, 30 sites tonight, but, they would all need to be investigated and so that would be something that you would expect to, if that was in the terms of reference of the full-blown master plan, it would be reasonable to assume that would be something that we would ask for a consultant to check into, evaluate through discussions with staff and feedback from the public and the stakeholders, the players. I think the marching orders for staff for this report were to look at existing court sites. We can look at other sites, but I think for the sake of a couple of years worth of time to have it dovetail into the full-blown master plan would make some sense. The other thing I should note is, and whatever decision council makes is fine, staff will run with that, but the same concern with respect to there having been a lack of consultation with the neighbors around Windsor would also be in effect up at Henderson, and also we haven't talked to the tennis community, and We certainly have, I think, learned a lesson on that one, that we would want to engage them before we were to make that decision.
So I just would like to move this forward if I can, and I recognize this is not to resolve the world's issues on this stuff, but we have just a question of what we want to do right now, and really in the next couple of year or two. Do we continue to use the existing pickleball courts? Do we, in this Carnarvon plan, do we want to consider the moving of these to some other location, or the pickleball to the other location in the course of that change or beforehand? So I think I'd like to kind of bring that back to this. Councillor Braithwaite, then Councillor Ney.
Thank you. And I mean, I've listened with interest to all the conversation, and I'm still drawn back to option number 1, which is just to approve the draft Carnarvon Park Master Plan as originally presented, including 1 tennis court and 4 pickleball courts. So I'm going to make that motion.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any other comments you want to add to that, Councillor Braithwaite?
Yeah, I think that, you know, this is a struggle for us because obviously here we are, it's hard being our municipality where everybody's so healthy and they want to get out and do exercise all the time. And it's hard being our municipality in that we don't have all of the space that we would want in the places that we would want so that we could build these things, or the money to build these things. I think that the timing of the whole park master plan in 2021 will really help us with this as well, and it may change our mind at that time, because as we've heard tonight, the timing on the Carnarvon Park rebuild, or to put the master plan into implementation, probably won't happen until 2024, and it will start happening with the buildings and not with the courts. So I think that we should try to mitigate noise level for the sake of the residents that live around there right now. We should try our very best to mitigate the noise level while this process is in place. And but that's really the reason I want to go ahead with option number 1.
Okay, and do we have a seconder? Okay. Councillor Nate, you had another comment.
Yeah. It's along the same lines as Councillor Braithwaite. I guess I'm surprised you haven't said this yet, Councillor Braithwaite, that we're really in a pickle, aren't we? Yeah, that's the kind of thing you would have said. Yeah, but can I just ask staff one more question?
Of course,
for you,
yep.
Mr. Mayor. Mr. Herman, we had a bit of an earlier discussion around ways to mitigate the sound on the existing pickleball courts, and there was a discussion in the new plan to move them further away from the residents. But I'm just wondering, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you have any sense, given some of the information we've heard from the public about other ways to mitigate the sound, that could be accomplished in this instance?
Mr. Herman?
Through the chair, in the short term, you mean, for the next couple of years? Well, certainly I'll have a conversation with those staff tomorrow. I have made notes about the quieter paddles. I'm not aware of where we're at on that. And I'll just ask if we're right up to date on the softer balls, and I know there was talk about limiting the hours and things like that. So I'll just make sure I'm right up to speed on that. But, you know, I know those staff they field the calls before they come to me. So I know they're actively pursuing any opportunities to mitigate noise there.
Well, I thank you for that, and I would look forward to what kind of, when you really drill down, what kind of possibilities would be, because I do too, as others here are taking very seriously the sound issue. The pinging is like a torturous sound, and I do understand what's going on for the. At least that's what I heard on the YouTubes that I watched. So we need to do something. I don't think just passing it over to the Windsor Park folks is really a good solution, and I can see the complications with Henderson. So I'm inclined also to just keep it at the status quo with some real effort to see seek out every possibility to mitigate those sounds and whether they're realistic for the residents there. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Green, you had a comment?
I'll be very quick. I think the deal breaker for me is the consultation piece, and you have kindly acknowledged that, Mr. Herman, which I appreciate. That's the first thing, and then I also think this will give us time to look at options, perhaps, and time to think this through. But I think it would be unwise and unfair to just arbitrarily move these courts to Windsor Park without ever having talked to the neighborhood. So thank you.
Thank you. As the person who suggested this in the first place, I think I should probably say something here, because I think there's a couple of things that strike me. One, if we're looking at the time frame, we're looking at the 2024 to kind of get the work done on that site, and 2021 to have the possibility of doing the master plan and maybe consider these in more context. All I was looking for really was just to look at, it is a very tight site, and Windsor, for example, has room around it that you could plant taller trees or thicker bushes that could do it a lot more absorbing, and it's an exponential scale. It drops with sound with distance, so I think there is some logic to that, to consider it over time. I don't have any great passion to move this right now, but I thought it was important to understand what the options were. I take quite seriously the staff's concerns about the impact of the bookings at Henderson. Notwithstanding that they're empty a lot of the time, those drive a lot of revenue for our municipality as well in terms of booking those tournaments that are quite important for us to be able to fund, because we need a high recovery rate for our assets here to keep going. So I think what's being suggested here of just leaving it as is for now and looking at this within the context of the 2021 master plan is quite comfortable for me. So I think that's a reasonable way forward. And I apologize if the suggestion causes a bit of an uproar on this. I do appreciate the thought that went into this report from the staff. Is there any other comments from Councillor Appleton?
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want everybody, I'm still an advocate for the relocation to Windsor Park. I will grudgingly support the motion to leave things as is. I will just make the comment and make it very clear that whether you're for or against the relocation option, I think everybody needs to be very aware that we're essentially just moving this issue down the road. This is a rapidly expanding sport. I feel it's going to be extremely likely that we are looking at the expansion to new pickleball courts. We only have so much space, and we only have so many parks with active recreation spaces in them. So it is an untenable situation that pickleball, if we choose to expand it in this municipality, will only be found at Carnarvon Park. So I think that everybody just needs to be very honest and straightforward that in our parks master plan, we will be evaluating other options for expanded facilities if that's what the community desires. So, yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Councillor Green?
My final word on this is that there are other options too, perhaps, and one of those may be a partnership with schools, local schools, because I heard Mr. Tanner say that he attended pickleball lessons at a local school. So there may be options to expand through partnerships, and I think that's something that is possible among our local schools. Thank you.
All right, and we have a motion on the table. No other comments. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Opposed? Councillor Zelka? Okay. One opposed. Thank you very much. So the result of that, just so people are clear on what happened, is the motion was essentially to keep, for the time being, the courts will stay as they are. It does not close it permanently, but for the time being, the pickleball courts will stay certainly for this summer. And we're hoping to address the issue in a broader sense in 2021 master plan. So thank you for that. Thank you, Mr. Herman, Mr. Holding, Mr. Heidley, for your time. We have item number 4. So I guess since we're only 1 minute to my target end time, we're probably not going to make that item. Item number 4, we have Uplands Siting and Design for 3033 Devon Road. Ms. Jensen, I'm assuming that you will introduce this. This is a Upland Siting and Design. So just so those in the audience understand, we're dealing with land use issues now. Some of these have different processes. Upland Siting and Design just means that within the Uplands boundary, there's a requirement for us to consider siting and design for all new builds or any changes, significant changes. So the process here is we'll consider this if we can send it back for changes, or we can recommend approvals, in which case it would be approved with the adoption of the minutes of this meeting at the next council meeting. Ms. Jensen.
Thank you, Chair. This particular property is located on the east side of Devon Road. The proposed home would replace a single-level home with a two-story home. The intent is to have a design that's considered French contemporary, where the second story would be pushed further back on the house so that you retain essentially a one-story level streetscape within the immediate area. Design would include stucco cladding, a hipped roof, and inset windows, and the home would be built to a level 3 of the BC Energy Step Code. The advisory design panel did review the application and recommended a number of changes that were subsequently incorporated into the design. Upon further review, they did recommend that council consider approving the application, but suggested that the garage still be pushed further back towards the main part of the home. The proposed design did have the front face of the garage projecting out in front of the home. That has now been pushed back about a foot further towards the house. That still allows for enough room for the garage to accommodate two vehicles as well as some storage. Staff have reviewed the application and note that the proposed works do meet all requirements of the RS2 zone and substantially meet the Uplands design guidelines. 2 trees are being removed, one of them due to declining health and the other due to impacts from the proposed construction. They will be using 3 replacement trees for those trees, and others are also being added to the site, which achieves a 45% tree canopy cover. Staff are requesting council direction.
Thank you, Ms. Jensen. The process here is we'll have questions from council, then we'll go to the public if they have questions or comments, and then we'll come back to this table, similar to past process. Councillor Appleton, then Councillor Green.
Thank you, Your Worship. Through you to staff. I just wanted to get a item of clarification. Just in the Arborist memo, the Arborist notes that the Arborist had not, he notes towards the end here that he had not seen any future landscape plans, so cannot include any future canopy cover. I noticed that the plans that are included do include a landscape plan and include a planting plan to achieve the 45% target. And I note that in the staff report, it's also indicated to meet 45%. So I'm just curious about procedure. Is the lack of district arborist sign off on the landscape plan an issue here, or is staff willing to just sort of ensure that the arborist is adequately informed, given that he said that he didn't see the landscape plan?
So this is a March 20th arborist plan and a June final plan. Ms. Jensen?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as you'll note that this memo is dated for March 20th, so the arborists have been involved all the way through this process. We included this one as it does include the full content from the Parks Department, but they are aware and there are no issues.
Thank you, Councillor Appleton. Councillor Green?
Yes, thank you. And through you to Ms. Jensen, I recall at the advisory design panel meeting regarding this application, there were concerns about the overhang and the garage impact. Have those been addressed at all, or do we know what the status is on those suggested changes? Thank you.
Ms. Jensen?
Thank you. Through you, Chair. Yes, so this application went through 2 rounds of the advisory design panel. So the initial meeting, the advisory design panel asked for a number of changes which were included. That included looking at parging at the foundation wall so that there would be no exposed foundation. They wanted the driveway width reduced at the boulevard. That was also achieved. They added permeable paving with plantings to the front yard to create more of that park-like setting. And they did want the garage de-emphasized along the front of the building. And that was done by removing some of the front entry gables along the garage. At the second meeting, they still had concerns about how the garage was stepping out in front of the building, and that's where they've stepped it back a foot.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Any other questions of committee? Just so I'm, Councillor Zelka.
Sorry, a late question for you through to staff. Is it possible to have an indication of what the votes were at the design panel for the first meeting and the second meeting in terms of approval or moving it forward, please?
Ms. Jensen, do we have that information?
At the first meeting, I'm not sure the numbers, but it would have been a motion to defer it to a subsequent meeting. At the second meeting, it was a motion to approve, so long as some changes were made to the garage, and that was with 5 of them in attendance. It was 1 that was opposed.
Councillor Braithwaite?
Sorry, just a clarification, because I know that one of the letters that we received on this, it said that the proposal was passed by a split vote.
The answer was 4 votes to 1 in that vote to approve it.
No, I
to recommend
understand.
approve it.
Okay, so, but I'm just, so the letter that we have on file here is incorrect then, because a split vote to me would have been 3 and 2.
I think you could argue that a 4-1 is still a split vote. Any other questions? If not, I'll just ask people to come forward. I do have one quick question, because I look at this site and had the pleasure of going and visiting it today with a couple of other councillors, and it appears that the massing from the street is quite effective, that it keeps it in alignment with the other houses. But of course, it pushes that massing to the back. So is there any concerns here? I think the report actually says that there's no concerns with shading. Can you just confirm that and we don't usually consider shading on 2-story homes, but that there's no sense that what's been done, I guess, essentially to address any concerns of shading on neighborhood properties?
Thank you, Chair. I think I would suggest that as a 2-story home, and given that part of that is pushed back on the property, it's you're unlikely to get that much effect from the shading at just 2 stories. It's also based on the orientation of the home with the east-west siding on the east side of the road. I don't think you would see a lot on the adjacent parcel.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Braithwaite?
So just a clarification, because it looks like a 2-story house from the front, but from the back, because it's a sloping lot, it actually looks more like a 3-story building. So I'm wondering, and I was at the site today, and it just seems to me that that might be a little bit more imposing on the neighboring properties.
Is that a question, or is it just an observation?
Because it is a little bit, it's further back on the property and it's further out. Or is it further in?
I believe it's been moved away from the side lot lines, but Ms. Jensen?
Yeah, if I could suggest, if you look at some of the plans, you'll actually see where that, you're correct. There is more of a facade or a vertical length of the building in the rear yard, but it is pushed back along the front, so it's not right up to the front of the building. As far as setbacks go, the existing north lot line, there's about a 1-foot difference between the existing and what's proposed, so it'll actually be stepped a foot further back. And the south lot line, you'll actually see it step back by an additional 13 feet.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Green?
Through you to Ms. Jensen, and this is only a question that you may not be able to answer, perhaps the applicant can, but in one of the pieces of correspondence, there's reference made to the high quality of existing materials that this older home was built from in 1957. So they talk about the solid oak floors and heavy timbers and so on. Will there be an attempt, and I should have asked this perhaps weeks ago, but I didn't think about it at that point. I wasn't aware of this letter. Will there be an attempt by the builder to recycle any of those materials or reuse those materials rather than just taking everything out to Heartland? Thank you.
I will, if you know the specifics of this application, but maybe also just touch on a general policy in place for that. Ms.
Yeah, I think
Jensen.
that would be a question to the applicant.
Okay. Is the applicant here? All right, so why don't you come forward? You get the same process as we had with other ones, just if you can just state your name. You can come to the center if you wish. It's a bit more directly in line with the microphone.
Hello, my name's Lindsay Baker. I live in Saanich. I'm the home designer for this project.
Welcome, Mr. Baker.
Yeah, my client would like to reuse what he can from the home. So if we can pull that floor and reuse it, that would be great. But things do get damaged when you're trying to pull them up if they've been glued down and whatnot. We can't reuse the windows because we need really good thermal windows, and that's kind of goes along the whole story, right? Because we're trying to create a very thermal building, so we'll try our best.
I appreciate that. It's an important issue for me. So many of the housing demolitions of older homes which are built of first growth or old growth are, they're beautifully built, and a lot of them end up in yellow bins, and so it's a concern I have. So I appreciate any effort made to recycle what can be salvaged from this house. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions of the applicant? I'm not seeing any. You probably want to hang out somewhere close by,
Yeah,
and
I was
we'll
gonna
we'll open the floor up to the public right now, and then we'll come back to this table. Is there anybody from the public who wishes to speak to the application? I see a neighbor, so I'm assuming at least somebody's here to. Again, just the same process. Just state your name and municipality.
Your Worship and Councillors, thank you for your time. My name is Chris Garrett. I'm a resident of Oak Bay. My wife and I live next door to 3033 Devon Road. The present house is basically sound, and so it's sad to see plans for its demolition rather than renovation. Renovation is being undertaken on many houses in the area of Devon, Dover and Dorset successfully. Any replacement is subject to the Uplands design guidelines as reinforced in the official community plan. The proposed new house violates these guidelines in very significant ways. The OCP emphasizes that new development should be comparable in scale and massing with other buildings on the street. Instead, the proposed house is 2 stories instead of the single story of all the nearby houses on the street. It has a floor area approaching twice that of typical houses on the street. The OCP also stipulates that new development should be sited as much as possible within the existing development footprint. The proposed building is largely outside this, extending twice as far into the backyard and completely out of line with neighboring houses. This leads to significant overlook and privacy issues, although these are supposed to be considered under regulations. The proposed building has more than 20 windows facing our property, many of them in the 2nd story. The extension into the backyard also involves the removal of a protected Sitka spruce. The advisory design panel, I was unable to attend the first meeting, but did attend the second. The panel focused on the design, but major reservations were expressed about many aspects of the proposal. The vote to approve the application came out of the blue and was not unanimous, as you've heard. It was commented that the proposed building would be an unsatisfactory addition to the neighborhood and would create discomfort. As you can see, even the proposal of it has. Overall, this proposal represents an assault on the sense of harmony and neighborliness that is supposed to characterize the Uplands. Approving it would set a very dangerous precedent of ignoring the official community plan. I hope that you will reject the application. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett. Please come forward. You can sit in the next seat over if you wish.
My name is Garrett Lambert. It's a bit confusing.
Welcome, Mr. Lambert.
My second name is Christopher, so I'm the backyard neighbor who wrote the letter. And to Mrs. Braithwaite's comment, I hadn't realized there were actually 5 members because only 4 seemed to be participating in the discussion. Hence, I said it was a split decision. I don't have an objection to the house being replaced, but I do have an objection to a house that is twice the size of any other house on the street. May I? I kind of dried out during the long wait.
Yes, help yourself to some water, absolutely.
One of the other comments made by the panel at their last meeting was that it was a brave person to build a house of that size on that street and to be the first to do so. And if one was to do that, it ought to be a house that would set the standard for all of the other houses to come, because we all realize that that's the trend in the Uplands. But this house doesn't meet that standard, and the panel itself was clearly fatigued with the process of going back and forth and really having the minimum responses to every one of their recommendations. And it was obvious that they were not at all happy, but they were, I think, worn out and unable to see how they could move this thing forward, and hence the vote. From my and my wife's point of view, we're going to look at a massive house, 3 stories tall. It's a bit disingenuous to call it a 2-story house. It is not. It's been designed to max out to the last square foot the potential of that lot. In your report, you say that
You can just address all your comments through me if you don't mind. We try
Sorry?
not to. We just address your comments to
Sorry.
me and
in the Arborist report, it says clearly that with the removal of the existing trees that will be going, there will be 15% coverage. I can't see how planting 3 trees on a lot that size, a third of an acre, is going to get you to 45%. And in addition, the Arborist report says that he would be granted, the owner would be granted permission to remove the Sitka spruce because of the root system, and the laurels, which is admittedly a pretty messy hedge along the back fence. That would leave us completely exposed to the house, which includes a 2nd floor deck looking right into our master bedroom, living room, and kitchen. Obviously, we're not very happy. And I think the fact that the design council wasn't very happy ought to indicate to you that you should probably take a deeper look into this particular proposal. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Thank you, Mr. Lambert. And I'm going to invite the applicant to come forward just to address some of the concerns raised, in particular I think most notably just the issues of massing and privacy and mitigation of those factors.
Yeah, I'll try to work backwards just from what's freshest in my mind. So, so the rear yard setback requirement says 7.6 meters, and we are about, I think it's 3.5 meters larger than that. So we are set back further. I could have tried to max it out. I didn't. I tried to not max out anything. So my side yards are less, my front yard is less, my height is less. This building isn't as big as it could be as per bylaw. But, I know that we have some neighbors that are very concerned. I have spoken with them. And we really want to try to be good to our neighbors, but, my client also wants to have a home that suits his needs. So this is where I'm doing this juggling act and why I'm here. We have moved the trees to address the privacy concerns in the rear yard. So we do have 2 of the larger trees now at the very back, and that's to provide privacy. I've also adjusted the rear windows of that elevation, and that will allow less openings and hopefully, give him a little bit more privacy as well. The basement is technically a basement as per the bylaw, so we are only 2 levels. We do not have 3 levels, even though it's been said that we do. So I'm being careful with my words here. It's a hard one. We have done everything we can within your bylaws to meet this. And I know we have resistance. We're the first people here. There's someone else that's down the street that does have a 2-level home. We're not the only 2-level home down at the end of the cul-de-sac. No one wants to have new construction in their backyard, but it does happen. And this is where we're at right now, just trying to make it as nice as possible. My roof design is with hips, and it's stepped back at the front and in the sides, and it's lower on top. And that's so the upper level is built within that roof system. And what that does is it reduces the massing of the building, and it reduces that possible shading of that building too. So that's compared to having like a big modern square box, which would, enhance that size of the mass. So this is where we've ended up now.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate that. Are there any other, I'll go back to the audience. If there's anybody else that wishes to come forward to speak to this application. I don't see anybody else, so I'll bring it back to this table. You can stay at the table in case there's any other questions here. Any questions from council? If not, our committee. Councillor Patterson and then Councillor Braithwaite.
Yes, through you, Mayor, to the applicant. It does appear that privacy is really a concern on this, and I can certainly appreciate the existing homes and their concern. Could you perhaps speak to the planting plan, just the size that you're intending to plant? Because certainly you can plant trees that are 2 or 3 feet high, and you can get more mature specimens that do afford greater privacy much quicker. So perhaps if we could learn something about that, that would be helpful.
Good comment. My client would be happy to spend some extra money to get a bigger tree or bigger trees in the backyard that hasn't been a specified size to us to say that it has to be 6 feet or 8 feet. We'd have to probably shop around and do some homework to figure out what the best circumstances are. But by all means, if that would help satisfy some needs here, then we would do that.
It's Mr. Baker, is that right?
That is right. Lindsay Baker, yeah.
Couldn't read my own handwriting
Yeah,
here, so I
sorry,
had to make sure I didn't misspeak. Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else, Councillor Patterson? Councillor Braithwaite?
Mine was a little bit on the privacy as well, and I know that where the back deck is, that is considered part of your floor air ratio. So in actual fact, that piece could have been enclosed as part of the house.
That's right.
And still being part of your floor air ratio. So it could either be a deck or part of the house.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I do think that, I'm going to make a comment on I do think that this has been built to almost the maximum. The FAR is 0.4, you're at 0.366. The coverage is 25%, you're at 24.77. And it's 4,568 square feet. So it is a very large house. And when I look at that street, I do see single level houses mostly all around it. Occasionally you'll see a house that's from the front doesn't look like it's as big as what this house could possibly be, but this house doesn't look that big from the front either. It's not till you get round to the back where the massing just seems so much more. So, yeah. Okay, thanks.
It wasn't really a question, but if you have a comment, you're more
I'd
than
just
welcome.
like to speak to the site coverage that is based on the entire footprint. So it's not just the building footprint. There's some other things in the work there. So
yeah,
yeah.
If I may, I think that one of the I understand that you haven't asked for any variances whatsoever, and I appreciate that. And usually that's what we look for when a house is taken down fully on a lot, is we look for no variances. So I applaud you for that. However, when I look at a house that's being built to the maximum, basically, right off the very start, that doesn't leave any wiggle room for any future owner to come along and say, I'd like to add this or I'd like to add that. And so that's where, that could be an issue with our bylaws, but it could be, I would just like to see people come forward and not build to the maximum right away like that. That's all.
Thank you, Councillor Braithwaite. Councillor Name?
I have a question to staff through you, Mayor. So, Ms. Jensen, I'm just wondering if you could help me understand when we're reviewing the design guidelines, the Uplands design guidelines, and sometimes there's some guidelines that are in conflict. And I want to understand from a planning perspective, what happens in a neighborhood where the bylaw permits a certain amount of development of the building, which exceeds the surrounding, the adjacent properties that, like in this case, that are low level and clearly haven't got the same square footage of what this application is. So the issue becomes within the Uplands design guidelines that one could say that this house isn't in keeping, I can't remember the exact wording of the guideline, but it's disruptive somewhat in relationship to the existing buildings, which are not optimizing what the bylaw permits them to do. So I'm just wondering, how does that get reconciled? Because this must happen all the time in the Uplands, where we have new building that's not sympathetic with the existing neighborhood that's been underdeveloped, if you will. I don't know if that's the right word, but I think you understand what I mean.
Ms. Jensen, I guess as best you can, try to address the guidelines as they're laid out formally.
Thank you, Chair. Well, there's a number of different answers to that, but essentially, on the one hand, we're working with the zoning bylaw. And we know that within this particular zone, they are subject to maximums for setbacks, maximum for heights, maximum for floor area ratio, and lot coverage. So as part of that review, we're looking as to how they fit into those zoning regulations and whether they are complying with the zoning or not. The other piece are the guidelines that are set out for the Uplands area, and we try to go through this as best as possible to pick out those pieces that are in conflict, and then how is it cohesive with the rest of the neighborhood. So for example, relationship and character and massing to the image of the neighborhood. Well, we do know that the immediate neighborhood is characterized by a mix of 1- and 2-story homes. We do know that the proposed home will be more substantial than the existing home, but again, they meet the requirements of the zoning bylaw. Relationship to adjacent buildings. Yes, it is a larger massing. We also know that they're increasing the separation between the homes on the north and south lot lines, and that they're not going to the maximum of the rear yard setback. Effects of shadows. 2-story dwelling located in the subject of property, that would lend itself to minimizing more of the shadowing and the privacy. So it's really trying to look at all of those issues and to provide as sound a round balance of those guidelines to council as possible.
Thank you. Any other, Councillor Zelka?
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm a bit uncomfortable with the design, I'll have to admit. I understand that since there are no variances being asked for, that if this was not in the Uplands, it would simply be rubber stamped and approved. And the only reason it's here before us is because it is in the Uplands, and we're being asked to pass comment in our best judgment and our best subjective judgment, I guess, as to whether this is in alignment with our view of what the Uplands parkland residential park-like setting is defined as. I do notice that the guidelines are to maintain and reinforce a residential park-like setting, to ensure the sensitivity of new development to existing dwellings. I'm concerned about this particular design with respect to that, especially the landscape features, which aren't particularly clear to me yet, and to promote design excellence for buildings in the Uplands. And I'm afraid that garage, I have a real problem with the garage with respect to it being in the Uplands and designed that way. It doesn't say Uplands to me. I'm wondering out loud whether a possible third option might be available when we get to motions as to whether this could potentially be a recommendation to refer back to staff to continue to work with the designer on potentially something that might be more acceptable. And less uncomfortable, certainly to me.
Any other comments? I will look for a motion at some point here, but I'm just going to I'm going to make my observations of this. And I think at the end of the day, I assess these primarily one, obviously they have to comply with the zoning. I'm not terribly sympathetic where people want variances on new builds on these sites. So, and I do actually appreciate the fact that this is smaller than the allowable size. I know it doesn't seem like much to go from 40% to 36%, but it's a heck of a lot more than we're seeing mostly. Mostly it's 39.99% in most of these houses. And the fact that there is part of that is deck space, which is not, it will be used sometimes in the nice days, but it's not a primary, overlook piece of it. I think that there is substantial negative impact on the back and even the one side with the things to the neighbors. I think there is overlook there, no question. And so the question is how much of that has been mitigated as part of this. I generally, given that it's within the larger setbacks than required, et cetera, tend to feel fairly comfortable with that. I would say that the front treatment actually is quite sympathetic to the streetscape. If you're going to build a 1.5 or 2-story building, doing it in this fashion where there is a lowered and consistent roof line feeding off the street will have an effect of quite a low mass on the streetscape. But no argument that there is a negative impact onto the rear and the side yard neighbors in this case. So the question I have and how I'm going to assess this is there substantial deviation from what we expect from design? Have efforts been made to mitigate those impacts where possible? And is there do I feel comfortable to say, despite the fact that it's under the allowable size, to go back and say no, that this has to be changed? There are sometimes we get these cases in front of us that there's an obvious answer and that there's a substantial amount of massing or a specific window that overlooks. I don't see that here. I have a hard time giving clear direction. So I guess all I would ask of the committee, whatever the direction, if the direction is to move forward, recommend forward, then that's clear. And if there's a recommendation to not, then we need some very clear guidance to the applicant to give some understanding of where that could be changed, because I think sending it back without clear guidelines is very difficult in this situation where the bylaw is being so complied with. But I do need a motion at some point here. I'm going to turn to Councillor Appleton because he made the mistake of catching my eye.
Thank you, Worship. I will make a motion to move the staff recommendation that the proposal to construct a new single-family dwelling at 3033 Devon Road be approved as to Uplands siting and design.
Second.
So it's moved and seconded. Is there any, now we can have further discussion. Is there any further discussion? Do you want to motivate it all, or are you okay with just the motion?
Thank you, Worship. I will just say that in essence, I concur very much with the comments that you just made. Essentially that, in situations, I think that even in my limited time on council so far, we've already run into a couple of situations where we've seen the issues surrounding the Uplands design guidelines. And so this really rests with a judgment call as to whether something does or does not meet. And in our role as council, my feeling is that we rely on the design panel and staff to give us information on whether or not they feel that concurs with that. I understand that there was discussion at design panel and it was not a unanimous decision at design panel. Nevertheless, they did recommend approval, as do staff. So I tend to concur with the mayor that unless there is some kind of significant deal breaker that would deviate significantly from what we would expect here, that this is supportable.
Any other conversation? Any other discussion? Councillor Zelka?
I'll be voting against the particular motion in the hopes that the design could be changed with respect to less emphasis on the garage facing the roadway, and ideally a little bit less height at the back overlooking the rear, the properties to the rear.
Okay, thank you. Anybody? Any other discussion? I'm not seeing any. All those in favor? Opposed? 2 opposed. Councillor Green and Councillor Zelka opposed. Thank you very much. So it's not over completely. Council has to adopt the minutes of this meeting before that becomes official, but there's no variance, so there's no further process at this point. So thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Baker. Item number 5, Upland siting and design. Similar process as the last one, although this is a renovation and not a new build. So Ms. Jensen, do you want to give a quick overview?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, this property is down near the end of Valdez Place that is adjacent to Uplands Park. It's currently a 2-story home that was constructed in 1979, and the owner is proposing to renovate the home by constructing a 924 square foot addition on the west and the rear sides of the home, updating the front entryway with new horizontal paneling, installing a new metal roof, and widening the driveway to provide side-by-side parking outside the one-car garage. The advisory design panel was generally supportive of the application, noting that the addition was sensitive to the existing home and recommended council consider approving the application. They did suggest reconsideration of the driveway alignment in an attempt to retain one of the Gary oak trees, but given its proximity to the excavation, there really is no way to retain it. Staff have also reviewed the application with respect to site characteristics and the neighborhood. The proposed works will update the look of the existing home in keeping with its architectural style while maintaining the vertical cedar siding, and there is minimal impact to the adjacent properties. The applicant had originally proposed to remove 8 trees adjacent to the home, 7 of which are Gary oak trees. Through discussions with staff and some revisions to materials, this has been reduced to 4. 2 of these are within the building footprint and 2 in close proximity to the excavation. So in addition to the 4 replacement trees that they would be required to provide, they are planting more than 30 trees on the site, giving us an estimated tree canopy cover of 70%. Staff are seeking council direction.
Thank you very much for that. Is the applicant here? Okay, come forward because I'm going to have a question for you in any case. Is there any questions of the applicant or of staff on this application? I'll turn first to Councillor Green. Anything you were on design panel and at the site today? Is there anything you want to, any questions you have?
I have no questions, just a comment that I think my impression was that this is a very sympathetic treatment and the house is not being demolished, and I think that's a plus. Thank you.
Okay, well, I'm the only one with a question then at this point, unless you're looking forward. Just curious about the choice of a metal roof. When I was at the house, I was struck. It said it has a classic 70s vibe with the cedar siding and everything else there. Is there, and the cedar, the metal roof seems a little out of sync with that. So is there a reason for the choice from a design perspective or just from a practicality perspective?
Mostly practicality. My name's Dennis Moore, by the way.
Sorry, yes.
I'm the architect for the house. It's one of the two materials that actually is very common in that style of building and continues actually to be common in a style that was generated in California called Sea Ranch. And a standing seam metal roof is very commonly used in that area, probably even less so than a cedar shingle roof. So it's a little bit of that. It's also to be a little less cedar, have a little less cedar everywhere. It's inside and outside everywhere. And right now it's a black asphalt roof, so the choice was to go to some slightly different material, still call it an organic color, a little more respectful, a little more expense, a little more quality than another asphalt shingle roof.
Thank you. Just wait there in case there's any other questions, but is there anybody from the audience who wishes to comment on this application? Again, we are sitting at 3055 Valdez Place. Not seeing anybody. We'll bring it back to this table.
I'll move approval.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call it. Oh, Councillor Appleton, sorry. You have faster hand.
Sorry, Your Worship. Just very briefly, I just wanted to, and I'm sorry that Mr. Hidley isn't here, but I just wanted to make the comment that I appreciated the effort that the municipal arborist and staff have put into working with the applicant to retain the maximum amount of trees and really take a detailed look at each tree involved. So I think when we're talking about Gary Oaks and sort of where this one sits in on the site, I appreciate that level of detail. I think that's kind of what I would expect and what I would hope for as far as consideration of tree protection on these kinds of sites.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Green?
Yes, and I would agree that I think staff should be commended for their work on this particular project, and thank you to the architect as well. I know this house, I knew the previous owners, so I'm very pleased personally to see it being renovated.
Yeah, very much.
Thank you.
All right, seeing no further conversation, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed and opposed. So same as last time, with no variances, this just goes to be approved through the minute approval process at the next meeting. Okay, thank you. Moving on to item number 6, we have a development variance permit application for 1175 Beach Drive. I'll go through the process that'll follow on this, but we have the applicant here, I see. This is a reasonably straightforward application, but there may be some questions. Are there any questions of the applicant or of staff? Sorry, Ms. Jensen, would you do a quick overview of what this is? My apologies.
Really quick. As council's likely aware, there is a patio in front of the Oak Bay Beach Hotel up at the north end of the hotel along Beach Drive. The hotel's hoping to install a retractable awning which projects over a portion of that patio area, offering weather protection for the patrons. The zoning bylaw recognizes the use of awnings but does specify certain requirements for size and siting. So in this particular instance, 2 variances are needed. One being a variance from 2.5 meters to 5.18 meters for the projection from a building face, and a variance of 1.2 meters to 4.08 meters for projection into the front yard. The siting of the proposed awning is not really in an area that would have any significant impact either on the adjacent neighbors or on the form and character of the building. Staff consider the proposed work to be supportable, but seeking council direction.
Sure, and I just asked Councillor Ney, just raised a point. It's probably a good one.
Yeah, I just thought I'm going to recuse myself because I own a property in the building.
Don't go too far, though. Okay, thank you, Councillor Nay. Okay, thank you very much, Ms. Jensen, for the overview. Are there questions of Councillor Green?
I'm prepared to make the motion if you are prepared.
Well, we need to just get, it's a variance piece, and I need to get the public to have a comment as well. So if there's any questions, we'll take questions now. If not, we'll invite questions from the audience or comments. Anybody from the audience wish to speak to this awning at the Beach Hotel? I don't see any. Now we can come back here and make a motion and comments.
I'll move the staff recommendation.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Any further discussion? Councillor Zalka?
Just a question, not quite sure through to who, with respect to the usage of the land underneath the awning. Is there intention for serving food, serving drink, or is it mainly just sun protection? What's the intention, please?
I'll invite the applicant to come forward. It is an existing patio for food service at this time, I believe, but why don't you have a seat and just let us know for sure, so I don't say anything wrong.
Hi, I'm Michelle Lesage, General Manager of the Oak Bay Beach Hotel. It is a current patio that is actually a cafe. It is the largest portion of the seating for the cafe, so it's actually already licensed for 60 people out in that area. So we just want to have some protection from the rain.
Well, I'm very much looking forward to enjoying a drink out there after we approve this. Thank you.
Conflict of interest at all? No, that's I guess since you're here, I'll ask the question. I know this would have been dealt with, but it can be a windy spot, and it's a large awning. So I'm assuming this has got some special consideration to ensure it's got the strength required to manage
my
that.
Architect to answer that question.
Ms. Lesage, you don't know the answer to these engineering of your awning?
The engineering.
Good evening, Your Worship, Council.
So you have to say your name for the record.
Justin Gammon with Christine Lintard Architect.
Thank you.
And we obviously are working with a full contingent of consultants on this. So we're going to have structural engineers that will be looking for that attachment. It is a solid concrete building, and there will be obviously assurances for all of the wind loads and snow loads that might possibly occur on that.
All right, thank you. It is described as a retractable awning, is that correct?
It is indeed retractable. There is a 5-foot component of it that is permanently affixed to the building, just as the housing, and then the retractable component comes off of that.
Fantastic, thank you very much. All right, all my random questions answered well, thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Just for all the applicants to understand, so as a variance application, this now goes out to notification of neighbors. So the neighbors will all within 100 meters, I believe, is the 100 feet, I think, is the notification area. And then it'll come back to a future council meeting where we'll have that any correspondence. Neighbors are welcome to speak again, and then we'll make a final determination of approval or not. Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Zelka?
It might be a bit late, but I just wanted to ask a quick question about the fire pit.
Maybe we can just do that offline. It's not necessary to the piece here. Thanks. Our item number 7, our second to last before our adjournment to in camera, we have a heritage revitalization agreement for 602 Newport Avenue. Ms. Jensen, I believe you have the honors again of introducing this item.
Thank you, Chair. So this application is for a heritage revitalization agreement that proposes to designate the existing home on the property as heritage and create a second single-family lot on the west portion of the property facing Linkley's. The Local Government Act contains provisions for a heritage revitalization agreement as a means of allowing redevelopment of a heritage property while respecting its heritage character. It can set, for example, terms and conditions for items such as use and density, which then take precedence over other bylaws, such as the zoning bylaw. Its primary intent is to preserve the heritage home while allowing some form of benefit to the owner, but the provisions of the agreement must be agreed to by both the owner and the municipality. The home at Newport is not currently on the Oak Bay Heritage Register. As part of the proposal, the applicant has offered to designate the home as heritage and place it on the Heritage Register. A statement of significance was prepared for the property, indicating the home has heritage value for its history of ownership, for its period revival architecture, and for its contribution to neighborhood character. Constructed in 1930 by the Craftsman Company, the Georgian Revival home features a broad-hipped roof, stucco cladding, and a porte-cochere along the front of the home. 90 years later, that home continues to be well-maintained in a mature landscape setting. The Heritage Commission reviewed the application. They noted that the home has a grand house estate feel and that it was important for the new home to not detract from the heritage building. Discussion also focused on retaining the hedgerow atmosphere along Linkley's Avenue, and ultimately their recommendation was in favor of the Heritage Revitalization Agreement and designating the home. The application has also been reviewed with respect to OCP policy, neighborhood context, green space, and heritage preservation as laid out in the staff report, and staff are requesting council direction as to the options outlined in the report.
Thank you, Ms. Jensen. We have the application in front of us, had a chance to read it. Are there questions of the committee to staff or to the applicant? Councillor Patterson?
Yes, thank you,
In fact,
Mayor.
I'll invite the applicant forward if you want to come forward just to, I'm assuming there's going to be a couple of questions here through the course of this, yes. And that way I can just direct it without the thing, and perhaps I can just get your name to start with.
Of course. John Kay. I'm the architect and resident of Victoria.
Welcome, Mr. Kay. Councillor Patterson.
Yes, thank you, Mayor. This is really a question, I think, for staff. When this application was reviewed by the Heritage Commission, it was recognized that the Heritage Home is in excellent condition and doesn't require any major revitalization, and nor is a major revitalization planned. That there was value to the community in having the home designated, of course, and that is what is really outlined in the bylaw for this. But there was also a lot of discussion around, as you have commented on, the requirement of keeping the hedgerow aspect and the rural feel to Linkley-S, where the second dwelling unit will be built. Could you perhaps explain to us what authorization the community would have to see that that work is done if it's not part of the agreement that is outlined here?
Ms. Jensen, I did read that in the report as well, those specific pieces. So, yeah, thank you.
Yes, thank you, through Chair. To continue on with this Heritage Revitalization Agreement, should Council approve it, it still requires to go through a subdivision process. And as part of that process, we would be looking at a boulevard encroachment agreement within the Linkley's area adjacent to their property, which essentially sets 3 different stages for heights of vegetation that would be planted within that area to retain that feel. And it would be the responsibility of the homeowner to look after that area.
Could I comment?
Thank you. Yes, you may.
Thank you. We've had several meetings with the Parks Department. They've been very helpful, and we've come up with a program through our landscape designer that essentially reflects Deborah's position of the landscaping. And I think no one wants Linkley's to remain more natural than the client, and I think we're quite concerned about that. We view it as part of the heritage aspect of the project.
Okay, thank you. I heard it was be part of essentially almost a covenant on the new property as it goes through that subdivision process, as I understand. So it is slightly separate from the heritage process, but it's attached to the heritage revitalization agreement. Councillor Patterson?
And just one other question of staff, or perhaps the architect, that there was also discussion at the Heritage Commission meeting that Public Works would attempt to minimize its impact along with waiving normal requirements, i.e. for paved connection for the driveway. I don't know where those discussions are or when they come into this application, but if we could get comments on that, that would help too.
I think it's most appropriate to go to staff because that's really part of our contractual agreements. Ms. Jensen?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'm sorry, I don't have the specific numbers in front of me, but we have had discussions around how they're going to connect to utilities, both off of Newport, which is already looked after, and then onto Linkley's. As far as the paving goes, we will be requiring some extension of paving just to make it a safer laneway for 2 cars to pass, but we are not looking for them to do the full width of paving.
Okay, thank you very much. Are there any other questions of the applicant or staff on this? Okay, I have a couple of questions I will ask. I guess my question around part of it is the nature of the RS2 zone. This is kind of a funny zone. It's zoned RS2, which is a minimum of 23,000 square feet or so. It's already a relatively small lot for that. I got the impression that was going to remain, the one lot was going to remain RS2 and the secondary lot was going to change to an RS5. Is that correct? And does that make sense given that there's actually different sort of zoning for smaller lots and larger lots in terms of how house treatments are dealt with?
To clarify, so the Heritage Revitalization Agreement does not rezone a property. What we're essentially doing is saying that the front lot, the one that faces along Newport with the existing home on it, would retain the characteristics of an RS2 zone, and it still remains an RS2 zone, whereas the proposed lot at the back of the property is also zoned RS2, but with the variances contained within the Heritage Revitalization Agreement, it would essentially treat it as if it was an RS5 zone.
Okay, I understand that. That makes a certain amount of sense. I guess the second question I have is just similar to the hedgerow questions and things of that nature, but the treatment of that back building is obviously critically important to the success or failure of this in terms of its scaling and pieces. So what is the actual building itself in that contained design? Is that essentially written into the contract, or is that still subject to expansion? I mean, obviously anything can be overridden by council, but is it a covenant that council has to change, or is it just subject to the zoning constraints on that lot?
You've seen plans within, the Newport plans that are attached to the report give you an idea of the design of the building that the applicant's proposing.
Sorry, you're talking about the Linkley's building, not the Newport?
The Linkley's building, yes, sorry.
Yes, okay, thank you.
The plans are shown in there to give you an idea of what the building is proposed to look like. We haven't attached those to the Heritage Revitalization Agreement because it's that much more difficult should they need to make any changes for them to come back and modify that. Through the subdivision process, we can require the siting and design covenant.
Okay, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. Any other questions of the applicant? Okay. Thank you. I'm going to invite people from the audience who wish to come forward and ask questions. You can have a seat, Mr. Kay, and we'll probably call you back to answer some questions in bulk at the end. So maybe just take notes as they go if there's questions that you might be able to answer.
Hi, I'm Pat Wilson, and I'm standing in for Bronwyn Taylor, who sends her regrets. I am on the Heritage Commission.
Bronwyn Taylor being the chair of the Heritage Commission. Yes.
Yes. And when we looked at this, we took our heritage values and we looked at all the aspects of this. And we are concerned about two heritage values being streetscapes and natural landscape features, which all came over to the Linkley side of the property. You know, we appreciate it's a smaller home that's going to be built. It's for aging in place. It has a lot of attributes that seem to fit with the OCP ideas. But looking at it from a heritage point of view, this green hedgerow on Linkley to us is really a wonderful heritage asset of Oak Bay. These quirky little side streets with their green along the road are very important. And we I shouldn't say we, Jane Hall and a couple of people are starting a list of all these various green spaces about in Oak Bay on public lands. And if you have anything like that, our email address is on the website. Send it to us. What we want to do is come up with a list that can come to council with a recommendation that no curbs, no sidewalks, minimal impact for connecting to services, restoration of the area after work is complete. I look at it and, you know, there's the Brighton pathway that Rick Marshall and Carol Davies did all that work on. There's things like even that wild bit of blackberry patch over there. There's Prospect with its wild little bits along there and no sidewalks. All of that should be considered when you're looking at the plans, and I believe you really should make the homeowner who's doing the renovations restore these areas as part of their permit process. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wilson. It is oakbayheritage@oakbay.ca is the email address,
Okay.
if anybody's wondering. Desperately writing down an email address to document their hedgerows, that's the place to do it. Anybody else wish to come forward and speak to us about the application? I know there's more than one person here, so I'm just going to ask you to come forward. And I just want to ask as well, because I don't know how controversial any of this is, but there are occasionally times of cheering or booing and at the K happens. So I just ask you not to do that and to make sure everybody feels safe and welcome here for their opinion. So, welcome.
Thank you for having this meeting and giving us some of the local people an opportunity to address.
If I could just ask you, I know you've given it
okay.
once, but I guess you're setting it here again.
My name is Bob Louie, and we are the neighbor immediately north of this particular property. We were first learned of this particular application about a year ago. And at that particular time, I wasn't entirely against it, although I wasn't entirely for it also. The reason why we didn't say no to that application strongly was because we have been in that area for 35 years, and we also known the applicant, Mrs. Pat Battles, for roughly about 30 years. So as part of our good neighbor policy, of course, we want to be amicable to everyone around us. The second reason why we didn't say no to Ling is because we know John Kay, the architect. We respect him a lot, and I know he's going to do a good job because we own other heritage properties downtown, and he has provided good advice on our properties in the past. However, as time went by, a lot of our other neighbors around us began to voice their concerns about this this particular application on the impact on the neighborhood. As you know, as well spoken, Linkley's Avenue, or Linkley's Lane as we call it, is a very special area, and it is a charming area. It is an avenue to Anderson Hill Park, used by a lot of walkers. And you, of course, know about all this one. Our concern here is this. I consider this a bit of a spot zoning, even though there is a heritage aspect to it. For example, about 15 years ago, the previous councils gave a variance to 648 Linkley's Avenue. And the reason why that was against the OCP regulation at that time. There was a lot on there. There was frontage on both Bing and Linkley's, and so they divided in a similar way, divided it, and that has impacted the ambience. Beginning of the impact on the ambience of Linkley's Avenue. Before that particular time, even to today, there was considered lower Linkley's with more the development down there, and the upper Linkley's, which is the 500 and 600 block. Since that particular time, as I say, was using 648 as an example, the feeding of Linkley's has changed. And of course, if this application is approved, there will be further deterioration on that ambience. That's a major concern. The second item I would like to raise is that I do have some knowledge about wise land use planning and management. I was the former head of the soil conservation unit for the BC government, and many years ago, almost 50 years ago, with a lot of the information that we provided led to the establishment of the agricultural land reserve. So an example of the corridor that, as a result of this, there is a corridor of the Pat Bay Highway, all the way from downtown, all the way out to the rural area, out to the Shorts Bay, is essentially rural. If the ALR did not come in, you can imagine what that corridor would look like today. That's a major corridor. So Linkley's Lane is a small corridor, will undergo a similar type of change if we don't look after it. The third item that I would like to raise is about heritage preservations. I do know about heritage preservations, and the importance of retaining heritage buildings to the fabric of the community. I'm a director of the Bastion Square Revitalization Committee, and we try our best, similar to you people here, to try your best to maintain and increase the heritage values of these little special areas in the greater area of Victoria. We do own 3 heritage buildings in downtown. We own a number of commercial buildings. 3 of them are heritage, and we do our best. And one of them is the Murchie's building on Government Street, which John Kay has provided advice to us. And so I do understand what you guys are trying to do, and I applaud the Heritage Committee on that. But I think that in the overall scheme of things, be careful, you may be gaining some heritage designation, but you may be losing something that is variable, very precious to the community. So on behalf of all the concerned citizens around that area, I urge you not to approve this. I think if the committee and the city of Oak Bay wants to preserve buildings like this, there may be situations where this particular policy would work, where you say, okay, we would preserve it, and in exchange we would give you a bonus of some sort. But in this particular case, I'm not so sure whether this one applies. So I think I would urge that the city look at other ways of preserving buildings such as this. Thank you very much.
Thank you for coming forward. Mr. Louis?
Your Worship, councillors, I'm Richard Roy, Newport Avenue.
Welcome, Mr. Roy.
My predecessor just mentioned 648 Linkley's, and before I read my little comments here, I might mention that when that property was subdivided a long time ago now, there was a covenant regarding leaving the vegetation in place, and that covenant was not observed. So covenants are really not always worth what they're meant to be. The Anderson Hill Park area is very unique in the municipality. It starts at Central, where Island becomes a 1-lane. It winds its way up the hill, past the stone house built in 1909 for Dr. Jones, who I understand donated the land for the park, and then past the Todd's homes, Ernie Todd and Jack Todd, and then it connects again with Linkley's, another 1-lane road back to Central. It's a very narrow unique laneway, and it would not survive if we allow ongoing development and the addition of new infrastructure. It's a narrow roadway, and increased traffic and congestion and roadside parking would gradually encroach on the natural environment. I'm totally in favor of applying the heritage designation to as many classic older Oak Bay homes as possible. Also, the municipality encourages heritage with generous grant programs available on an annual basis. However, in this case, it appears in addition to the grants available, heritage designation is conditional on a subdivision approval. Finally, the neighbors on Newport and Linkley's in the immediate vicinity have all been contacted, and 95%, including myself, have signed off in opposition to this proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Roy. Either seat is fine.
My
Welcome.
name is Pat Kell, and I live at 641 Newport, and I've lived there for 26 years. It came to my attention about 5 years ago that one of my neighbors was planning to subdivide her property, which is located at 602 Newport. A second home would be built facing Linkley's. I spoke to other people in the neighborhood about the plan, and a petition of 33 names was submitted to the mayor, to Mayor Jensen and the councillors in June of 2014, opposing any subdivision in the 600 block of Newport. The goal was to protect the trees and foliage and special ambience of the single-lane street of Linkley's. I also met with Mayor Jensen, who assured me that any increase in density in Oak Bay would take place along main corridors. In September of 2016, while attending the infill meeting held at the University of Victoria, I met Roy Thomason, the previous Oak Bay planner, who asked me for another copy of the petition. In September 2018, an application was made by the owner of 602 Newport to subdivide her property. I once again submitted the petition as there had been staffing changes in the planning department of Oak Bay. On this past Friday, June 13th, I received a phone call alerting me that the Heritage Revitalization Agreement to facilitate a two-lot subdivision of 602 Newport was on the agenda for the Oak Bay Committee of the Whole on Monday, this evening. This gave very little time to notify people who have a direct interest in this application. I reviewed the original petition and found that 9 people no longer lived in the area. But we now have 23 people who live within one block of 602 Newport, who are opposed to this subdivision. I reviewed the correspondence included with the agenda and found 6 letters who opposed the subdivision and only 1 letter in support from the people who live within one block of the 602 Newport. 9 people have filled out a form letter supporting the Heritage Revitalization Agreement and a lot subdivision, but none of these people live in the 500 or 600 block of Newport or Linkley's. And 1 letter of support was received from outside the area as well. The conclusion is that there is overwhelming opposition from the property owners who live within a block of the proposed sublot division. On behalf of the 23 petitioners, I ask you to reject the proposed subdivision at 602 Newport. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Kell. And I'm going to ask, because this body is going to consider all of the positives and negatives of these things. If there's specifics of concern, then just if you can raise those as well. The interest of the petitions is of interest to us, obviously, but it's hard without having all the information in front of us to know how those decisions were made, both for or against. So we're trying to look at the concerns and facts and ideas and pieces coming forward. So I appreciate all the people coming forward. Is there anyone else who wishes to speak to the application?
My name is Kelly Wright, and I live on Newport, 2 doors down from 602 Newport.
And Mr. Wright, if I can also just get you to write your name, just because Wright can be spelled so many different ways.
Yeah. Okay. We'll talk about that. I'm not aware that that can be spelled different ways. What I want to say is that if you respect 602 as a heritage designated property, please also respect our neighborhood in the same manner. Golf Links Park was created in approximately 1912 and specifically created to provide buyers with lot sizes larger than those found in Victoria, to try and provide a country feel in our neighborhood. Subdividing these lots destroy the original heritage intent of Golf Links Park. It was brought up that there will be an allowance made for two-way traffic on Linkley's, and that will completely destroy the character of that street. It's a one lane right now, and you actually have to pull over to allow a car to pass. If you make it two-way driving, it destroys what was discussed previously about the hedgerows and that unique character of the area. The owner of 602 Newport has made it clear in her form letter for getting people to sign off in support of her that this heritage designation of her house is an end-around zoning simply to allow subdivision. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. I'm going to go to first-time speakers first, if that's okay, and then we'll come back. If anybody else wants to speak a second time. Because I will address the things, like some of the issues around the golf links and so forth.
Good evening. I laud the attempt to adjourn at 9 o'clock.
Yes.
Past us now. My name is Vern Bigden. I'm a resident of Linkley's Avenue, along with my wife, who's here tonight. I will write my name down because it's very hard to spell. When I'm done speaking, it'll be very short. You have a letter on file from us submitted today. We're against this. This really feels like two RS5 lots plopped in the middle of a large RS2 zoning. The golf links parks were created for a specific purpose 100 years ago, and we would hope that the council and the committee would respect that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Biggin. Anybody else wish to come forward and speak to council? Ms. Wilson, welcome back.
Just a quick point. I agree with.
Just speak into the microphone,
Okay.
otherwise.
A quick point. I agree with people that widening the street really isn't helping. It's losing its lane aspect. Why aren't we just making them one-way streets? One goes up the hill, the other one goes down the hill. Doesn't that solve no passing? You know, let's do it a simple way. And that should be there no matter what.
Thank you for your comment. Hopefully we don't have enough traffic on that lane to make the need to welcome.
Hello, my name's Lorraine Charlton. I'll write my name down. I live on Island Road, and I've lived in Oak Bay for 39 years. I appreciate the concern for retaining the rural English country lane aspect to Linkley's. We've been having work on Island Road, the section that I live on, for some time, and we've lost that sort of rural area. We now have gravel on the sides and a widened road, and I understand you've heard about that. So I live that, and I appreciate that. But I would just like to make the comment that if the present owner were to sell the property, there could be a demolition of the property, and then you would be looking at, the neighbors would be looking at new construction. And in the area that I live in, I've had a lot of that around in the last few years, and some of it has been done well and sensitively, and some of it has, in my feeling, been out of scale. So it's a matter of looking at a proposal and considering if that proposal didn't go forward, what else could come. You've had one earlier tonight where there was almost maxed it out. And if that were the case on the property on Newport, then it could certainly require more blasting and perhaps more removal of trees, etc., which was the case with a very large old oak that had to come down with a new construction on Transit, in my view, recently. So anyways, I just say that's from my perspective that there is the other side of it with respect to a new development on the property of someone who hasn't lived in the area for a period of time, who does respect and has lived in that community. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Charleston. You can come forward and sit in the next chair there. We'll get a little rotation going to get through here. Ms. Hopkins, what's the procedures bylaw? At what point do we have to do a special motion to extend? Is it 10:30? So we're going to try not to do that if we can possibly avoid it, but we'll see what we can get through. Seems unlikely. Welcome.
Thank you. Dawn Wright, 636 Newport. My house property is on Newport, but backs onto Linkley's Lane, Linkley's Avenue. In regards to heritage property and saving older homes, I am totally for that. I agree with that 100%. And the solution here is to divide the application into two. Heritage status, number one. Then, if the homeowner wishes to subdivide that property, that is a second application. By all means, rescue the home. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to? We have another person come forward.
Curtis Hobson, Oak Bay.
Welcome, Mr. Hobson.
Thank you. I've been attending council for a while, and I've seen a number of HRAs come before council. And sometimes we hear about HRAs, and is it really about the revitalization aspect? So we know HRAs are supposed to benefit the community and also benefit the applicant. But that has to be balanced, I think. And we saw a particularly strange example on Beach Drive a while back where I think many members of council were quite shocked to find out that what they thought was going to happen on that lot was not happening on that lot. So that's something that I think council should be aware of again. As far as this application goes, you're going to decide, not me. The other piece, I noticed in the agreement that there was some discussion about infrastructure and who is going to pay for the upgrades. And I would encourage council to ensure that that's sort of taken care of. And I would also like to encourage council to ensure that they know what they're signing off on, because it was pretty obvious on that Beach Drive application that council did not know what they were signing off on and didn't get what they thought they were getting. The other aspect that goes, this is a little bit of a cart before the horse. We have a strategy. We don't have a housing strategy. I mean, it's in progress, but we might hear from Councillor Patterson, who was at the Heritage meeting or convention or whatever it was, about the use of heritage revitalization agreements and subdivisions. We know, or we would think, that the community would benefit by saving a heritage home. That's maybe true, but we know the applicant will benefit by having a subdivision. So, the pros and cons, the balances for both the community and the applicant, I think really need to be considered strongly. And the final piece is those lots were designed, and the houses were designed to function in relationship and harmony with the lot size. And if we continually add more housing to those large lot size, we disrespect the actual heritage, because the heritage is not just the house. The heritage is the lot, and the heritage is the relationship between the house and the lot and all the other houses and lots in that area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hobson. Anybody else wish to come forward? Yeah. Okay.
My name is also Pat Battles. I live on the larger section of Linkley's at 812. I've lived there for 19 years, and over that time I have seen 7 of the older homes on my street torn down. None of them were barged away, and everything went to landfill. I really appreciate the heritage aspects of my community, and I would like to see the house on 602 retained. And I think it's important for our residents to have an opportunity to build a smaller home and to age in place. I won't be able to do that in the home I live in because of the construction of the house, and I couldn't find one at the time that I bought that would allow me to do that. But I appreciate the opportunity of this proponent to be able to do that. And I think that the history of the house in which she is currently living and wishes to save is of great importance to the heritage of Oak Bay. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Battles. Is there anyone else who wishes to come forward to speak? You may speak again.
In regards to the owner building a smaller home to age in place, according to the architectural drawings, this is a 2-story home, 1,700 square feet totally, that is going to be occupied by one person. I do not think that is a good use of land or property. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else who wishes to come forward at this time to speak?
Could I respond to the last comment?
Yeah, I'll invite you forward actually to because there's a number of questions I think probably arisen out of the comment. So anybody else wish to come forward? Seeing anybody, so I'll bring it back to this table. And yes, if Mr. Kay, if you would come forward again, I'm sure there's a number of questions that you can answer. I'll just perhaps leave it to you. I think it may be helpful actually I'll let you address the questions that you captured, and then we can go back to the questions from council.
Starting with the last question, the house is approximately 1,700 feet. It does have a garage, which is not measured. It does have a double height living room, which is measured. It also has an elevator to get to the second floor, and it has turning circles for wheelchair mobility if that proves to be necessary. And those do add to the space of the building. Otherwise, it would be a smaller house. I think we've done what we could to make it modest. As far as other questions, I think people have discussed really what the option is before council. It's to have a heritage house, which I think is of significance. Don Luxton's report agrees. And I don't think Pat is, my client, Pat Battles, is in this as a developer. She's in this to be able to live in the neighborhood and be able to age in place. I think it's a legitimate comment. I think also, maybe we're a bit early in the show, in that we are providing, I would say, a minor level of densification in that area, and I think that that can be done, and I think we're showing that that can be done without really impacting the neighborhood. There has been comments that this was more at the meeting we had at the house rather than here. There has been comments that we were setting a precedent. I think this house and its setting is probably unique. I don't know of any other heritage designation houses that happen to front on 2 streets the way this one does. We would not be doing this if it required a panhandle or something like that to get access to a new lot. So I think this is a unique situation. I don't think it sets a precedent. I think it provides a minor level of densification. It provides a housing option for the current owner, and it will continue to provide that option. I think there's a need for smaller retirement homes. I don't think everybody wants to live in a condo with the implications of that. I think a lot of people are looking for more compact houses that are easier to maintain, that are built to a higher standard. We're into the step code and all that kind of thing with this house. And I think we've tried to produce a reasonable project, and I certainly understand that it stirred up the neighborhood. I think, like I said, maybe we're a bit early into the game. Within 3 or 4 lots of this house, it has been mentioned that there are smaller lots. There's one to the south of us, which has been split into 2 some time ago, and then there's others to the north. So it's not that it hasn't happened in that part of the community. I think one of the issues I think that needs to be talked about is I think if this project doesn't proceed, the current house, the Dorman house, is a pretty small house on a very large piece of property. And I don't use this as a threat to you, but I think it would be demolished. I think that has all sorts of implications. The house is sound. It's in excellent condition. It's had some retrofitting. It could easily have more. The embodied energy in that house will be destroyed. And I think that's a questionable approach to take in our world. We're talking climate emergency. And I think if we continue to throw away useful buildings, I think that's an incorrect way for us to approach the future. I think that's really what I have to say at this point. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions you might have.
I'm not, no, I'm just gonna, everybody's entitled to opinions at this table, but we're going to come back, bring this back to the council or to the meeting at this point, just for discussion. We can extend it again if we need to, but I think I need to come back to this table. Are there any other questions of the applicant? Questions and or comments at this point? Sure, can we extend to a specific time, because I don't want this going all night if possible.
I'll make a motion to extend to, dare I say, 11 o'clock.
I'm just managing the meeting. Somebody has to second that if it's
A
going to happen.
second.
And I believe procedures bylaw says it has to be unanimous to extend. Okay. So I will call the question to extend to 11. All those in favor? Opposed? You're opposed? Oh, okay. Just lingering hand. I turned too slowly. So we have passed to allow us to stay here as late as 11 o'clock. But we have to do, we'd like to accomplish something with this application, either send it for more information, move it forward to the next stage, or do something else in between. I have a number of options written down in front of us. I need, if someone was willing to make a motion, that's the easiest way to talk to it, if we have something concrete on the table.
I'm going to move the staff recommendation.
Which is to approve the HRA as
To approve the HRA as indicated.
So we have a mover and a seconder. Councillor Appleton, I'm going to ask you just to motivate a little bit. I think it needs some motivation given the concerns raised by neighbors.
Absolutely, yes. Thank you, Your Worship. And I want to indicate to the neighbors that have taken so much time out of their evening to stay here that I hear you loud and clear. I think that for me, the critical elements here are the designation of the property, achieving the designation of a property which in my opinion, as has been stated here a couple of times, should it not be designated, would almost certainly be lost and almost certainly be demolished. The replacement house, replacement structure would almost certainly be quite a bit larger and quite a bit different in style than the existing building. So given that, the values that are laid out in the statement of significance for the property, I think that there is a very strong argument for having that property be designated through the means available to us. The second key element for me regards the provision of housing options for aging in place. This is a bit of an unusual site. This is not a typical RS5 lot with a granny flat, for instance. It's a bit out of scale for that. But I still am a big believer in provision of different housing options throughout Oak Bay, everywhere that it's appropriate to do so and where we have an opportunity to do so. So those are my two main decision factors on this one.
Councillor Patterson, then Councillor Zelka.
Thank you, Mayor. And if I could just comment to Mr. Hobson's comment that came forward, and certainly, you know, I too appreciate all of the people that have come out to speak tonight, and I think we hear their concerns. I did attend the Heritage Conference, BC Heritage Conference, recently, and heritage revitalizations do vary from municipality to municipality. But I have to say that I certainly respect the criteria and the careful consideration that Oak Bay's Heritage Commission uses in evaluating these applications, and the obligation that they feel to do what they can to preserve the heritage home is their strong commitment to this community. And I think that would be shared across communities in BC. So they consider certainly the preservation of the heritage home, as opposed to if the lot is not, if we don't go this route and the lot perhaps would come up for sale, there would be no control then on that house being altered or removed totally. And they also were very cognizant of the rural feel to the area, and certainly expressed that opinion and made sure that that was carried through into the application. So I support the decision also that the Heritage Commission came forward with on this application. I think it was the right decision for this location and this property. Thank you.
Councillor Zelka, then Councillor Green.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be voting against the motion as stated. I was actually hoping for the second option, where we would be referred back to staff, and if this fails, I will be moving the second, the option number 2. I feel like this is a bit of a cart before the horse. We are in the middle of redoing our housing options, and effectively, this is a laneway studio to some extent, or a laneway house that's being proposed in what's being referred to as the RS5 lot. Our housing options will be defining what is appropriate. I actually hear what my colleague across the area suggests with respect to appropriate housing in appropriate areas of Oak Bay, and I would like to see what is appropriate, and we haven't actually defined that yet. So that's why I feel that this is coming forward a little bit early. I understand in 3 to 4 months, maybe shortly thereafter, we'll be getting some indication of what this housing strategy is going to look like. That speaks to, I would hope, this question of laneway houses and where secondary suites and all the other various housing options fit into that. Maybe I'm being a bit optimistic, but I'm certainly hoping to see that this year, if all goes well. So I would be hoping that we could defeat this motion and refer this back to staff for further work, pending our deliberations here with respect to what is appropriate for a laneway type house. With respect to laneway houses, I was really surprised that in this case the architect didn't take advantage of the new options that we've added to our zoning bylaw. In Schedule B of the zoning bylaw, there's a new provision for a single-story house that can have greater lot coverage, up to 35%. However, there's no second floor. But this building as proposed does have a second floor, which to my mind makes it much larger than it needs to be for what is the apparent intended use. That's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Green.
Thank you, Mayor. First of all, I want to acknowledge the time and the effort made by adjacent neighbors and residents in the neighborhood to come and provide input, to write to us. I mean, I think it's really important to get that kind of feedback. Secondly, I am a former Heritage Commission chair and member in Oak Bay, and the HRA is a good tool from a heritage perspective, I believe, and I think the Heritage Commission would agree. A lot of thought and negotiation and effort goes into each agreement. And this, I believe, is not a laneway house, Councillor Zelka. I think it's fronting another street, actually. And so this is not unlike, there have been two HRAs, two on Roslyn, actually one on Roslyn and one at the corner of Roslyn and Windsor. And if you look at the one at the corner of Roslyn and Windsor, that was an HRA, and there is a small cottage there. I think really, in essence, the house that is designed by the architect, Mr. Kay, and correct me if I'm wrong, this would be considered a story and a half, because it's only the master bedroom, I believe, that or the primary bedroom is up one level, and it's very small. So I would consider this a story and a half, not a two-story home. And I guess thirdly, I'm very concerned about the rate of demolition of older homes in Oak Bay, particularly in South Oak Bay. And when we have an opportunity to have what I would call a win-win, that is that this heritage home will be saved, and there is an opportunity for the owner to have a smaller home on the property. I believe that is a win-win for the community. And I think we have to be vigilant, though, about preserving what the neighbors have all talked about, and that is the ambience of the rural nature of Linkley's. This is an important thing. We almost lost a house up on Island Road, if people recall that issue, and that was a heritage home. And so whenever we can retain a heritage home and have something that I think is sympathetic to the property, the new design, I think it is a win-win for the community. And I hope that the neighborhood will come to that conclusion as well. But I do believe we should, as a municipality, be very vigilant about the kind of construction practices and how Linkley's is treated in terms of foliage and streetscape. Those are important values. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Green. Councillor Braithwaite.
Thank you, Mayor Murdoch, and through you. What is the shape of the original house? Is it in really good shape, or does it need a lot of work?
Mr. Kay?
Yes, the house I consider to be in excellent condition. As I mentioned before, Don Luxton and I did a statement of significance and also a condition report. Subsequent to that, we did a second follow-up condition report. Following that, we've had seismic engineers go through the house. There will be some seismic work, which is a request of the district. We've had the chimney inspected. It's excellent. The owner has maintained the house, I would say, impeccably. Yeah.
Thank you. So, and then I guess I have a question, if I can. Councillor Zelka brought up that he would be interested in having option number 2. If it did come to that, I'm wondering what areas of concerns would he identify, because that's one of the requests in option number 2, is that we would have to put forward areas of concern that we would identify the staff. So I'm wondering if I might ask what those areas might be.
Sure. You can ask that question. I will just I want to point out too, I think it's a point of process that our CEO just pointed out. And it's worth noting, we're not approving this or not approving it tonight. We're essentially deciding whether the application has enough merit to go forward. There will be a more formal application through the public hearing process. So this is sort of a litmus test if it has merit to move forward or not an approval. So I just want to get not too far into setting firm positions and pieces, but arguing the merits for and against at this point. With understanding we still have to have a very open mind as this proceeds through the process. Councillor Zelka, do you want to answer? Is there anything specific that you see? Attributes, or you didn't touch on specific pieces?
I thank you for the opportunity. It seems a bit odd to be speaking to a motion that is not on the floor. However, thank you for the opportunity to share some of my thoughts. I feel this area of the Golf Links Park is actually quite appropriate for a heritage conservation area. And my worry is that these sorts of changes that are being proposed that are going to change the laneway characteristics of Linkley's right in the very center. I can see it. It's already started to change at certainly at one end, and it's slowly inching its way down. But this is right in the middle. And I do refer to it as a laneway house because specifically Linkley's is a laneway rural characteristic. That's why I call it a laneway house. Now, of course, we need to find out what does laneway mean. So that's why I was making reference to the definitions and the work we'll be bringing forward. Hopefully, that staff will be bringing forward with respect to our housing strategy approaches. However, to speak specifically to Councillor Braithwaite's question, I would like to see the opportunity to bring forward, or give the staff at least, and the neighbors an opportunity to consider a heritage conservation area in this area, which is part of what I would say for element number 2. I'm not prepared to answer your question yet. I'd have to basically give you
No, that's
give
fair
us
enough.
more time.
Yep, that's fine. Thank you. Councillor Braithwaite?
I'm really struggling with this because I honestly don't want to lose the house, because I think that not moving forward with the HRA would give the opportunity to have it demolished. That property could be sold, that house could be demolished, and something that is much bigger than that house could go on that lot, because it is a very big lot. So it's and it could be built without any variances whatsoever, and so never come back to council. And that's a fear that I would have for a lot of those lots in that area. So I'm inclined to vote for this moving forward to the next step.
Thank you. Any other comments? Councillor Selka?
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm sorry, but this feels like threats have been provided, and I'm very uncomfortable. It feels this way to me. This is my personal feeling. Not that it's the fact, but it's a feeling. It's subjective, and I hate the feeling of moving forward where there's a sort of Damocles in some ways being held over our heads. I don't like feeling that way.
Fair enough. I think in fairness, the applicant hasn't made any sort of threats or anything, so I think we have to, it does feel like there's always that concern of losing heritage in the general sense, but not Councillor Green, I'm going to make a couple comments here as well.
Very quickly. I just want to reiterate that really is the decision, is to move it forward to see if it has further merit. I think the second point is that I value the Heritage Commission and their opinion. I am telling you they are absolutely vigilant about heritage in Oak Bay, and they will do somersaults and everything else to make sure that heritage is conserved and preserved and respected. And they in fact have their own strategic plan, the first time in Oak Bay's history. That was done in 2013. And we also have a very respected architect in our midst. In fact, the previous land use application for Valdez in the Uplands is the house, I believe, that John Kay designed. So it's the one that is being renovated. So I think we have some really strong people involved in this particular proposal. And I don't think there is anything nefarious with this proposal, but I do believe it has merit to go forward, and I respect the Heritage Commission's recommendation. And I think all of you, if you attended a commission meeting, you'd know how much thought they put into these applications. Thank you.
Say very briefly, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to support this to move forward. I do appreciate the concerns that have been expressed by the neighbors, but I really think that this is a legitimate use of an HRA, and I feel strongly that what's going to happen if we don't do this, you're going to end up with this house toppled, and that's what we said we would do. We would protect these heritage houses to protect the integrity of this community, and that this is an opportunity to do that. And I think the commission has done their due diligence. I'm good with that, and I do think there's ways to protect that ambience on the Linkley side there to keep that run. I noticed that a house that's being proposed is quite set back, and there's lots of opportunity for landscaping that'll meld into what's going on that on Linkley Street.
Thank you, Councillor Ney. I'll just say a few things. I think this needs to be framed a little bit. First, I'm very sympathetic to Councillor Zelka's point and some of the points raised by the members, the neighbors. This is done a little outside of a plan. So we have committed as a council to consider multiple housing options and to do that in a consistent and straightforward way that would address the housing needs of our community. I feel confident that the work the staff is doing is going to get us there, and that allows us to be a lot more consistent in our decision making. However, there's two things. One is we can't just not do any development in that process. We have to move things forward, and two, and then we have to look very carefully at the merits of each application on that front of it. So I guess this boils down to me whether or not there is enough merit here to move it forward, or is there anything specific that I would suggest don't fit that. It is spot zoning. I mean, I don't think there's any question about that. We are looking at a fairly unique part of this neighborhood. It's not completely unique, as pointed out. There was a back-to-back between Bing and Linkley's in the past, and there's been other pieces here and there that have been done. But is it the question, is this the zoning that we want for the whole area? I'm not convinced that's the case. However, can I consider this on its merits? Yes, I think I can. Because it is a little bit unique. I actually don't feel any threat. I don't think that this house is in any danger of disappearing in the near term, and there are other tools available to us as a council should we decide to protect a house that we feel has significant value to the community that we can designate without the owner's position. However, that comes with its own risks and issues, and not to be done without lightly. I look at this certainly in the consideration of Golf Links Park and the intention of that original subdivision, and is this in keeping with it? Again, I don't think this particular subdivision is, but is it out of keeping, and is the inclusion of this on Linkley's causing anything significant there? I'd say probably on balance there's a fair bit of merit in this, and I guess the bus ultimately boils down to me to precedent, because I don't feel like this is the model for this area to go and divide all these lots into multiple smaller lots. However, this is an HRA process. It is a very specific zoning tool for a specific house on the specific lot. And in the consideration of the merits of this, I certainly think it has enough merit to move forward, certainly enough merit to go to let staff work on it and come back with some more details. And frankly, that process also allows for more notification of neighbors to come forward and have more input. So. But I think it's very important for us all to keep a very open mind, because there may be more information that comes forward. I think as our housing plan develops, as this process goes forward, we're going to have to consider this as part of that, within that framework. That's my 2 cents. We have a motion on the table. Any other comments? I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? None opposed. Oh, one opposed. Sorry, Councillor Zelka opposed. So just process-wise, if I might turn to staff here, just to get a clarification of some approximate timelines and next steps for this. Ms. Jensen?
Thank you, Chair. So the next step would be for this to go to the next council meeting on June 24th. Council can consider the staff recommendation at that time. If they move forward with it, it would go forward to public hearing on July 8th.
July 8th is the tentative date. Okay. Okay, thank you very much, everybody, for coming out tonight. We have a need for a motion to adjourn.
I'll move that
camera.
in accordance with Section 91G of the Community Charter, that the open portion of the meeting of council be adjourned and that a closed session be convened to discuss litigation or potential litigation affecting the municipality.
Second.
Moving second. All those in favor? Opposed? Not opposed. Thank you, everyone.